The train whistle cut through the Texas heat like a knife, and Cole Haverford watched a woman stumble onto the platform with three exhausted children clinging to her skirts. He should have walked away. He always did. A man survived the frontier by staying alone, keeping his distance, building walls no one could breach. But something in her eyes, something in the way those kids stood so small and brave against the world, made him say the words that would change everything. I've got room for 4. This is their story. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey takes us. The sun hammered down on Prescott Station like God's own anvil, turning the wooden platform into a griddle that made the air shimmer and dance. Cole Haverford stood in the shade of the station house overhang, his worn hat pulled low over eyes that had learned long ago not to expect much from the world. At 26, he looked older. The frontier had a way of carving years into a man's face, etching lines of solitude and survival into skin bronzed by endless Texas sky. He'd come to town for supplies, nothing more. Feed for the horses, ammunition, maybe some tobacco if the general store had any worth buying. Cole had learned to make these trips quick and efficient, slipping in and out of civilization like a ghost, never staying long enough for folks to remember his face or ask questions he didn't want to answer. The ranch he'd built 15 miles outside of town was his sanctuary, his fortress, his carefully constructed world of silence and self-reliance. The afternoon train from Austin wasn't his concern. He'd already loaded his supplies into the wagon and should have been halfway home by now, but something had made him pause. Maybe it was the way the heat made him sluggish, or maybe it was the part of him that still remembered what it felt like to be connected to something larger than himself. Whatever the reason, he found himself leaning against the rough-hewn post, watching as the locomotive pulled in with its characteristic screech of metal and hiss of steam. Passengers began to disembark in the way they always did. Men in suits with leather satchels, a few ranch hands returning from business in the city, a traveling salesman whose overly friendly demeanor marked him as someone to avoid. Cole was about to turn away, about to mount his wagon and leave Prescott's dust behind when he saw her. She emerged from the passenger car like a vision from another world. Though vision was perhaps too kind a word for what she truly was, an exhausted woman at the end of her rope, clinging to dignity by her fingernails. Her dress had once been fine, Cole could tell that much. The dark blue fabric spoke of better days, though now it was wrinkled from travel and dusty at the hem. Her face was pale despite the heat, and her hands trembled slightly as she helped first one child, then another, then a third down the steep train steps. Cole felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He should look away. He should definitely look away. Other people's troubles were exactly that. Other people's. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, learned it in blood and grief and the kind of loss that made a man build walls so high nothing could ever climb them again. But he didn't look away. The woman wore a hat that had seen better days, and beneath it, her hair, a rich auburn that caught the sunlight, was pulled back in a style that was trying hard to be proper but was losing the battle. She couldn't have been more than 24, 25 maybe, though her eyes held the kind of weariness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with carrying weights too heavy for one person to bear. The children were what held Cole's attention, though. 3 of them stair-stepped in age like little soldiers arranged for inspection. The oldest was a boy, maybe 8 or 9, with serious dark eyes and shoulders that were trying hard to be broad, trying hard to be the man he thought his mother needed. He wore short pants and a jacket that was too warm for Texas heat, and he kept one hand protectively on his younger brother's shoulder. The second boy was perhaps 6, with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes that darted everywhere, taking in this new world with a mixture of fear and fascination. Despite the obvious exhaustion, there was something irrepressible about him, like a spring compressed but not broken. And then there was the girl. She couldn't have been more than 4, with blonde curls that framed a face still round with childhood. She clutched a battered doll in one hand and her mother's skirt with the other, and when she looked up at the town, at the strange new place that was so different from wherever they'd come from, her lower lip trembled just slightly before she caught it between her teeth, forcing it to be still. Cole watched as the conductor handed down their luggage, 2 worn trunks that had seen better days, held together with rope and hope. It was everything they owned, Cole realized. Everything in the world, tied up in two boxes that had traveled too many miles. The station master, old George Wickham, approached the woman with the practiced sympathy of a man who'd seen too many refugees from broken lives. Cole couldn't hear the conversation from where he stood, but he could read the story in their gestures. The woman's hands moving in polite, increasingly desperate motions. George's head shaking, slowly, regretfully. The way her shoulders sagged just slightly before she caught herself, straightening her spine with visible effort. "No rooms," Cole heard George say, as he moved close enough to catch the words. "Not proper ones anyway, ma'am. Maybe the boarding house on 5th Street. Mrs. Halloran sometimes takes in families, but I gotta be honest with you, she don't come cheap." "I see." The woman's voice was cultured, Eastern maybe, with the kind of accent that spoke of education and breeding. It made her presence here in dusty Prescott with her 3 children and 2 battered trunks all the more jarring. "And the rooms above the saloon that were mentioned in the telegraph?" George had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I don't think those would be, that is to say, they ain't suitable for a lady, especially not one with young'uns." The oldest boy's hand tightened on his brother's shoulder. The woman's face remained composed, but Cole saw the way her throat moved as she swallowed, the way her fingers tightened on her small handbag. She was doing calculations in her head, he could tell, counting coins that weren't there, trying to stretch resources that had already been stretched past breaking. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Wickham. Perhaps you could direct me to this Mrs. Halloran's establishment? 3 blocks east, 2 blocks north. The White House with the green shutters." George paused, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, you look like you could use some rest before you go walking through town in this heat. There's a bench in the shade over—" "We'll be fine." The woman's voice was firm, final. She turned to her children with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Come along, children. Daniel, help Eli with the smaller trunk. Rosie, stay close to Mama." Cole watched them struggle with the luggage. The older boy, Daniel, grabbed one handle of the larger trunk while his mother took the other. They managed to lift it perhaps 3 inches before having to set it down again. The woman's face flushed with effort and embarrassment. The little girl started to cry, soft hiccuping sobs she tried to muffle against her doll. Every instinct Cole had developed over the past 5 years screamed at him to walk away. He'd spent half a decade building a life that required nothing from anyone, a life where he was beholden to no one and no one was beholden to him. It was safe that way, predictable. A man couldn't lose what he never let himself have. His boots made hollow sounds on the wooden platform as he walked away. He made it exactly 12 steps. 12 steps before the little girl's crying grew louder, before he heard the woman's voice, tight with suppressed tears, saying, "It's all right, darling. Mama will figure it out. We're going to be just fine." That was the lie that did it. The bright, brave lie that mothers told when the world was crushing them and they had to pretend it wasn't for the sake of small hearts that still believed in happy endings. Cole stopped. He stood there for a long moment, his jaw working, arguing with himself in the theater of his own mind. Every rational thought he had said to keep walking. Every wall he'd built said to protect what he'd created. Every scar he carried said that caring led to loss, and loss led to the kind of pain that remade a man into someone harder, colder, safer. But somewhere beneath all of that, beneath the armor and the isolation, there was still a part of Cole Haverford that remembered being a boy himself. A boy who'd lost his own mother too young, who'd known what it was like to be small and scared and dependent on the kindness of a world that wasn't particularly kind. He turned around. The woman was attempting to drag the larger trunk across the platform, her face red with effort, while her children watched with helpless concern. She hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on the impossible task before her, too lost in whatever desperate planning was happening behind those exhausted eyes. "Ma'am." She jumped slightly at his voice, straightening up and turning to face him with the kind of wariness that told Cole she'd learned to be careful around strange men. Smart woman. Up close, he could see more details. The shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. The fine tremor in her hands that suggested she was running on nothing but will and determination. The way her dress, despite being travel-worn, was meticulously maintained, buttons all secure, hem carefully mended where it had torn. She was holding on to dignity with both hands, refusing to let poverty or circumstance strip her of it. Yes? Her voice was cautious, controlled. Cole suddenly realized he had no idea what to say. He'd walked over here on impulse, driven by something he couldn't name, and now he stood before her like a fool with his hat in his hands and no words in his mouth. He cleared his throat, feeling heat in his face that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. He gestured vaguely at the trunks. Couldn't help but overhear your situation. Her chin lifted slightly, a small gesture of defiance. I assure you, sir, we're quite capable of managing. We don't need charity. There it was. The pride that kept people hungry rather than accept help. The kind of stubborn dignity that Cole understood all too well because he'd worn it himself like armor for years. Wasn't offering charity, he said, the words coming easier now. Was thinking more along the lines of a trade. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of trade? I've got a ranch about 15 miles from here. It's a working spread. Cattle and horses mostly. Always could use some help around the place. The lie came surprisingly smooth, probably because parts of it were true. You seem like someone who's used to keeping a house. I'm someone who's let that particular skill go neglected. She studied him with an intensity that made Cole want to shift his weight like a schoolboy under examination. He could see her mind working, weighing risks and options, trying to determine if he was a threat or an answer to prayers she'd been too proud to speak aloud. You're offering me employment? She asked carefully. Room and board in exchange for housekeeping and cooking, Cole heard himself say. Nothing untoward, ma'am. I've got a foreman's cottage that's been empty since my last hand moved on. It's small, but it's got 2 rooms and a decent stove. You and your children would have privacy, and I'd have someone to make sure I'm eating something that hasn't been charred beyond recognition. It was a terrible plan. It was impulsive and illogical and went against every rule he'd made for himself about keeping people at arm's length. But something about this woman, about these children with their brave faces and trembling lips, had reached past his defenses and found the part of him he'd thought was dead. The younger boy, Eli, she'd called him, was watching Cole with open fascination. Are you a real cowboy? He asked suddenly, his voice high and clear. Do you have a gun? Have you fought Indians? Eli, his mother admonished, but there was relief in her voice, as if a child's innocent questions somehow normalized the strangeness of this encounter. I'm a rancher, Cole told the boy, surprised to find himself almost smiling. And yes, I have a gun, but mostly I use it for rattlesnakes and coyotes. Haven't fought any Indians. They've got better sense than to bother with a stubborn man and his contrary cattle. The boy grinned, and Cole felt something twist in his chest. When was the last time he'd made a child smile? The woman was still watching him, still calculating. I don't even know your name, she said quietly. Cole Haverford. I own the Double H Ranch, about an hour's ride northeast of here. He gestured toward his wagon, loaded with supplies. I'm heading back there now. You're welcome to come along, see the place before you decide. If you don't like what you see, I'll bring you right back to town. No questions asked. That's very generous, Mr. Haverford, but, Mama, I'm tired, the little girl, Rosie, interrupted, her voice small and plaintive. And hungry. The woman's face crumpled for just a moment before she caught herself. Cole saw it, though, that flash of defeated desperation, the look of someone who'd been running on empty for too long and had finally hit the wall. I have food, Cole said quickly. Packed some sandwiches and a canteen for the ride back. Your daughter could eat on the way, and we could talk about the arrangement. You'd be making a decision with a full stomach, at least. The older boy, Daniel, stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Cole and his mother in a gesture that was both protective and heartbreaking. What do you want from us? He asked, and his voice was older than his years, weighted with suspicions no child should have to carry. Cole knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. He saw himself in that serious face, saw the kind of forced maturity that came from losing a father and having to become the man of the family before you'd even figured out how to be a boy. Nothing but honest work from your mother, Cole said, meeting the boy's eyes directly. And maybe for you and your brother to help with some light chores if you're willing. Feed the chickens, gather eggs, that sort of thing. In return, you'd have a roof over your heads, regular meals, and space to just be kids for a while. Fair trade, seems to me. Daniel studied him for a long moment, then turned to his mother. She was watching the exchange with eyes that had gone bright with unshed tears. Whatever she saw in her son's face seemed to settle something for her. "Mrs. Marston," she said, extending a hand that trembled only slightly. "Lydia Marston. These are my children, Daniel, Eli, and Rosie." Cole took her hand, noting the calluses on fingers that had once been soft, the way her grip was firm despite the exhaustion. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Marston, and I promise you, my offer is made in good faith. You need help, and I could use yours. Seems like God might have put us on the same platform at the same time for a reason." She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "I'm not sure God has been paying much attention to me lately, Mr. Haverford." "Well then," Cole said, straightening up and reaching for the nearest trunk. "Maybe he's starting to." Within minutes, they had the luggage loaded into the wagon. Cole had a way with efficient movement, the economical grace of someone who'd learned to do everything himself and do it well. He lifted the trunks as if they weighed nothing, secured them with practiced knots, and then helped Mrs. Marston and the children up onto the wagon seat. Rosie ended up on Cole's lap, much to everyone's surprise, including his own. She'd climbed up without asking, settling herself with the confidence of a child too young to understand social boundaries, and before Cole could figure out how to politely relocate her, her mother had intervened. "Rosie, sweetheart, you can't just—" "She's fine," Cole said, the words escaping before he'd thought them through. The little girl weighed almost nothing, just a warm bundle of exhausted child, and she'd already closed her eyes, her head drooping against his chest. "Long as she doesn't mind being a little dusty by the time we arrive." Lydia looked like she wanted to object, but fatigue won out over propriety. She nodded, settling her other children on the seat beside her. Daniel sat ramrod straight, maintaining his vigil. Eli immediately began asking questions about everything they passed, his natural exuberance breaking through his exhaustion. As the wagon pulled out of Prescott, heading toward open country, Cole became aware of eyes watching them. He caught Mrs. Sarah Henderson staring from her position outside the dry goods store, her face arranged in an expression of scandalized interest. Old Tom Murray paused in his conversation outside the saloon to watch them pass, his weathered face creasing with curiosity. By sunset, Cole knew, the whole town would be buzzing with speculation about Cole Haverford, the hermit rancher who lived alone and liked it that way, driving out of town with a woman and 3 children like he'd suddenly acquired a ready-made family from the mercantile. Let them talk. Cole had stopped caring about gossip years ago. The ride to the Double H took just over an hour, following a rutted track that wound through increasingly wild country. The town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling hills covered in long grass that moved like water in the wind. Live oaks dotted the landscape, their branches spread wide for shade. In the distance, Cole could see his cattle, small dark shapes against the golden grass. Eli kept up a running commentary, pointing at every bird, every interesting rock, every stand of trees. "What's that bird, Mr. Haverford? Is that where you keep your cows? Do you have horses? Can I ride one?" "That's a red-tailed hawk," Cole answered. "Yes, that's part of the grazing land. Yes, I have horses. And maybe, if your mother says it's all right, and you prove you can be responsible around them." Lydia watched him with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. He'd unwrapped the sandwiches, thick slabs of bread with beef and cheese, and distributed them to the children. Rosie had woken up just long enough to eat before falling asleep again, and now all 3 children were drowsing in the afternoon heat, their bellies full for the first time in what might have been days. "You didn't have to do this," Lydia said quietly, when the only sound was the creak of the wagon and the clip-clop of the horse's hooves. "Take us in, I mean. We're strangers to you." Cole kept his eyes on the road ahead. Seemed like the right thing to do. Most men wouldn't have stopped. Maybe I'm not most men. She was quiet for a moment, and Cole could feel her studying him, trying to figure him out. "We won't be a burden to you," she said finally. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Haverford. I can cook and clean and mend. I can manage a household efficiently, and my boys will help however they can." "Never doubted it. And if the arrangement doesn't suit, if you find we're not what you expected?" "Mrs. Marston." Cole turned to look at her, and he saw that her eyes were indeed the color of honey, shot through with gold in the afternoon light. I wouldn't have offered if I wasn't prepared to follow through. I'm not a man who goes back on his word. She held his gaze for a long moment, and he saw her measuring him, saw her deciding whether to believe him. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and turned back to watch the road. The double H appeared as they crested a rise, and Cole tried to see it through her eyes. The main house was modest but well built, solid timber construction with a wide porch and a stone chimney. He'd built it himself 7 years ago, back when he'd still believed in the possibility of a future that included more than just himself. It was meant to house a family, though he'd never admitted that to anyone. 2 stories, with 4 bedrooms upstairs that he'd never furnished. Downstairs was a large kitchen and living area, a study, and a bedroom he never used because sleeping in that much space made him feel the emptiness more keenly. The barn and corrals spread out behind the house, well-maintained and organized. A stable for the horses, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, a small building he used for storage. And set slightly apart, about 50 yards from the main house, was the foreman's cottage, a one-room structure with a sleeping loft that he'd mentioned to Lydia, except it wasn't really suitable for a woman with 3 children. It was barely suitable for a single man. Cole had known that even as he'd described it to her, but he'd been so focused on getting them to agree to come that he hadn't thought past the immediate moment. Now, as the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house, Cole made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. "Actually," he said, before he could think better of it, "I think there might be a better arrangement." Lydia turned to him, confused. The children were stirring, looking around at their new surroundings with wide eyes. Cole set Rosie gently on the wagon seat and climbed down, then reached up to help Lydia descend. "The foreman's cottage. It's too small. I wasn't thinking clearly back in town." He gestured to the main house. "This place has 4 bedrooms upstairs. I only use 1 downstairs. Seems foolish to have all that space going to waste when you and your children need proper rooms." Lydia's eyes widened. "Mr. Haverford, I couldn't possibly—" "You'd have the entire upstairs to yourselves," Cole continued, the words coming faster now as the plan took shape in his mind. "Your own space, complete privacy. There's a door at the top of the stairs. You could even lock it if that would make you feel more comfortable. I'd stay downstairs, you'd have upstairs, and we'd share the kitchen and main living areas. That's reasonable, isn't it?" "It's extremely generous, but the propriety of such an arrangement is a matter of survival," Cole interrupted gently. "Mrs. Marston, I know what people will say, but seems to me you've got more pressing concerns than gossip, like making sure your children have warm beds and full bellies. Let the town cluck their tongues. They'll do it whether you're in the foreman's cottage or in the main house." Daniel had climbed down from the wagon and was standing close to his mother, his small hand finding hers. Eli was gaping at the barn, practically vibrating with excitement. Rosie was rubbing her eyes, looking around with confused interest. Lydia looked at her children, then back at the house, then at Cole. He could see the war happening behind her eyes, practicality versus propriety, survival versus reputation. She'd been raised to care about such things, he could tell. But she'd also been pushed to the edge of endurance, and sometimes at the edge, you had to make choices that would have been unthinkable in softer times. "On one condition," she said finally. "Name it." "This is employment, Mr. Haverford. I work for you, you provide room and board and compensation. We maintain a professional distance, and if either of us feels the arrangement is no longer working, we address it directly and honestly. Agreed?" Cole extended his hand. "Agreed." She took it, and this time when their palms met, something passed between them that neither of them was quite ready to name. A recognition, perhaps. A sense that they were both people who'd been broken by life and were still trying to figure out how to function with the pieces that remained. "Mama?" Eli called, already halfway to the barn despite his exhaustion. "Can I see the horses, please?" "After we get settled, love." Lydia's voice was warm, full of an affection that made Cole's chest tight. "Let's see our new rooms first." Cole led them into the house, and he tried not to notice how right it felt to hear footsteps other than his own on the wooden floors, to hear children's voices echoing in spaces that had been silent for too long. The main room was neat but impersonal, furniture that was functional rather than comfortable. walls that were bare of decoration, a general sense that someone lived here but didn't really inhabit the space. "Kitchen's through there," Cole said, pointing. "Help yourself to anything you need. There's a well pump just outside the back door and a washroom off the kitchen. Upstairs is 4 bedrooms. You can take your pick of which ones you want." Lydia was already moving through the space with the practiced eye of a woman used to managing a household. She noted the dusty windowsills, the ashes in the fireplace that hadn't been properly cleaned, the general air of masculine neglect that permeated everything. "When you said you'd let housekeeping go neglected," she said, running a finger along a shelf and examining the dust, "you were being extremely generous with yourself, Mr. Haverford." Despite everything, Cole felt himself smile, a rare expression that felt rusty on his face. "I said I was a rancher, ma'am, never claimed to be a housekeeper." She turned to look at him, and for the first time since he'd met her on that platform, he saw her truly smile. It transformed her face, chasing away the exhaustion and replacing it with something bright and warm and almost mischievous. "Well then," she said, rolling up her sleeves despite the fact that she'd been traveling for days, "I suppose I'd better start earning my keep." "Tomorrow," Cole said firmly. "Today, you're going to show those children their rooms, let them settle in, and then I'm going to make dinner." "You just said you char everything beyond recognition." "I make a passable stew. It's one of 3 things I can cook without burning down the house. You're welcome to judge my efforts, but tonight you're going to sit down and let someone take care of you for a change." For a moment, he thought she might cry. Her eyes went bright and her throat worked, and she looked away quickly, busying herself with removing Rosie's coat. When she looked back, she'd collected herself, but her voice was thick when she spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Haverford." "Cole," he said, "if we're going to be living under the same roof, seems like we can use first names." She nodded. "Cole. And you should call me Lydia." "Lydia." The name felt strange in his mouth, intimate in a way that made him immediately want to take it back. But she was looking at him with an expression of such profound gratitude that he couldn't bring himself to retreat into formality. The afternoon dissolved into activity. Lydia and the children explored upstairs, their footsteps and exclamations drifting down as they discovered the bedrooms. Cole brought in their trunks, hauling them up the stairs with the same efficiency he'd shown loading the wagon. He found Lydia standing in the largest bedroom, looking out the window at the land spreading away in all directions. "The boys can share the room next door," she was saying, more to herself than to him. "And Rosie will want to be close to me, so she can have the small room right across the hall. And this one—" She turned to face him, and there was wonder in her face. "I haven't had a room to myself in 2 years." Cole set the trunk down carefully. "It's yours now. There's linens in the chest at the foot of the bed. They're clean, but they might be a bit dusty. And if you need anything else, this is more than enough." She looked around the space, simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, a small writing desk by the window. "More than I expected. More than I deserve, probably." "Everyone deserves a soft place to land," Cole said quietly. "Especially after they've been falling for a while." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Cole saw her truly. Not just the exhausted widow on a train platform, not just the mother protecting her children, but Lydia. A woman who'd lost everything and was trying to build something from the ashes. A woman who was brave and proud, and so very tired of having to be both. "Cole?" Eli's voice called from another room. "There's a bird's nest in the tree outside this window. Can we keep it?" The moment broke. Lydia smiled, shaking her head. "I'd better go explain why we can't relocate a bird's nest indoors." She left, and Cole stood alone in what was now her room, feeling the weight of what he'd done settling on his shoulders. He'd opened his door to strangers. He'd invited chaos into his carefully ordered life. He'd taken 4 people who were utterly dependent on him and promised them safety. It was the opposite of everything he'd sworn to do after losing his family. It violated every rule he'd made about keeping his distance, about never giving his heart to anything he could lose. But as he heard Rosie's laugh drift down from upstairs, as he heard Daniel's serious voice asking his mother questions about their new home, as he heard Eli's infectious enthusiasm turning everything into an adventure, Cole realized he didn't regret it. Not yet, anyway. He went downstairs and started making stew, cutting vegetables with the kind of focused attention that kept him from thinking too hard about what came next. The light through the kitchen window turned golden as the sun began its descent, painting everything in warm tones that made the house look almost welcoming. By the time Lydia and the children came downstairs, drawn by the smell of cooking food, Cole had set the table, 5 places, though he couldn't remember the last time he'd needed more than one. They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, and Cole ladled out stew into bowls that had never held food for anyone but himself. "It's good," Daniel said, and there was surprise in his voice that made Cole want to laugh. "Don't sound so shocked. I told you I had 3 things I could cook without disaster." "What are the other 2?" Eli asked around a mouthful of bread. "Beans and bacon, and something I call coffee, but which probably violates the definition of the word." Lydia laughed, and the sound filled corners of the house that had been dark for too long. Rosie was already nodding over her bowl, exhaustion finally winning its battle. The boys ate with the single-minded focus of children who'd been hungry and were now, miraculously, not. And Cole sat at the head of his table, in his quiet house that was suddenly full of life, and wondered what in God's name he'd gotten himself into. After dinner, Lydia tried to clean up despite Cole's protests. They compromised. She washed while he dried, a domestic rhythm that felt simultaneously natural and surreal. The children were sent upstairs to prepare for bed, though their footsteps overhead suggested more playing than preparing was happening. "They're excited," Lydia said, scrubbing a pot with more vigor than necessary. "They haven't had much to be excited about lately." "How long have you been traveling?" Her hand stilled in the water. 6 weeks. Since the funeral." Cole waited, giving her space to continue or not. She was quiet for a long moment, and he thought that was the end of it. But then she started talking, her voice soft and steady. "My husband was a banker in Philadelphia, Marcus Marston. He was 42 when we married. I was 19. It seemed like a good match. He was established, respectable, kind to me in his way." She scrubbed harder at the pot. "He died of a heart condition we didn't know he had. Very suddenly, very completely. I'm sorry." The bank was less kind than Marcus had been. Turns out he'd made some poor investments, borrowed against accounts he shouldn't have. When he died, the truth came out. We lost everything, the house, the savings, my standing in society. His family wanted nothing to do with us. My own family. She laughed, a bitter sound. "Well, they made it clear that I'd made my bed and would have to lie in it." "So you came to Texas?" "I had a great aunt who lived in Austin. She died last year and left me a little money. Not much, but enough to get us here. I thought perhaps we could start over, find some place where the Marston name didn't mean scandal and ruin. But Austin was more expensive than I expected, and the money ran out faster than I'd planned, and..." She shrugged. "And then I found myself on a train platform in a town I'd never heard of, with 3 exhausted children and no idea what to do next." Cole took the pot from her hands and dried it carefully. "And then some strange cowboy offered you a job you hadn't asked for." "Some strange cowboy offered me a miracle I didn't deserve." She turned to face him, and her eyes were shining again. "Why did you do it, Cole? Really? You don't know us. We could be terrible people. I could be a terrible housekeeper. The children could be demons. Why take the risk?" Cole hung up the drying cloth, taking his time, choosing his words carefully. "I lost my family when I was young. My mother died when I was 12, and my father, well, he took his grief and turned it into something hard and mean. He died when I was 20, and I inherited this land. I built this house thinking maybe someday I'd fill it with something other than silence. But then..." He paused, the old pain rising up like a ghost. "But then I learned that wanting things and keeping them are 2 different matters. So I stopped wanting, stopped letting anyone get close. Figured it was safer that way." "What changed?" "You arrived with 3 children," he said simply. "And I looked at them standing on that platform, so small and brave and trying so hard not to be scared, and I remembered being that age, being scared, being alone. And I thought maybe I've got room for 4. Lydia reached out and touched his arm, just briefly, just a feather-light contact that was gone almost before it began. But it burned like a brand, that touch, and Cole felt something inside him that had been frozen for years begin, just barely, to thaw. You saved us today, she said quietly. I hope you know that. We were at the end. I had maybe enough money for 3 more nights at a boarding house, and then I don't know what I would have done. I was so afraid, Cole. So tired of being afraid. You're safe now, all of you. I promise you that. She nodded, and he saw her believe him, saw her let herself lean into the promise he'd made. I should get the children to bed. It's been a long day. For you too. Get some rest, Lydia. Tomorrow's soon enough to start earning your keep. She smiled at him, that bright, warm expression that transformed her face, and then she left, her footsteps light on the stairs. Cole heard her voice drifting down, soft and loving as she tucked her children into beds in rooms that would now be theirs. He heard their sleepy responses, heard the gentle sounds of a mother's goodnight routine that this house had never known. He stood in his kitchen, in the house he'd built for ghosts, and tried to understand what he'd done. He'd made a choice today that couldn't be unmade. He'd let 4 people into his fortress of solitude, and in doing so, he'd cracked open a door he'd thought was sealed forever. Outside, the Texas sky was brilliant with stars, vast and endless and indifferent to the small dramas of human hearts. Cole stepped onto the porch and looked up at them, those ancient lights that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and wouldn't even notice one man's decision to stop being alone. But Cole noticed. God help him. He noticed the way the house felt different already, the way warmth had seeped into spaces that had been cold. He noticed the way his chest felt tight, and his hands felt empty, and his heart felt like it was waking up from a long sleep. Tomorrow, he thought, would bring its own challenges. There would be gossip to weather, arrangements to make, a routine to establish. There would be the careful dance of boundaries and propriety, the navigation of a situation that was unconventional at best and scandalous at worst. But tonight, in the quiet dark, with the sound of children sleeping peacefully under his roof and a woman who smiled like sunlight settling into the room that was now hers, tonight, Cole Haverford allowed himself to hope, just a little, that maybe he'd done the right thing. Inside, the house was warm. Upstairs, 4 hearts beat steadily in sleep, safe and fed and sheltered. And downstairs, one cowboy who'd thought he was done with living discovered that sometimes life gave you a second chance when you least expected it. Sometimes you just had to be brave enough to say yes when it arrived on your doorstep. Sometimes you just had to have room for 4. The first rays of dawn crept through Cole's window like an apologetic guest, hesitant and soft. He'd been awake for an hour already, lying in the narrow bed he'd moved into the downstairs study, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house that breathed with more than one set of lungs. Someone upstairs had gotten up to use the washroom around 5. Lydia, he guessed, based on the careful lightness of the steps. Then silence again, the kind that felt different now, populated rather than empty. By the time the sun had fully broken over the horizon, painting the Texas landscape in shades of gold and amber, Cole was already outside, attending to the morning chores with a restless energy he couldn't quite explain. He fed the horses, mucked out stalls, checked the fence line near the east pasture where he'd noticed some weakness the day before. Physical labor had always been his meditation, his way of quieting thoughts that moved too fast and cut too deep. He was hammering a loose board back into place when he heard the back door open. Turning, he saw Lydia standing on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill, her hair still loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, softer, and Cole had to force himself to focus on the hammer in his hand rather than the way the early light caught the auburn in her hair. "Good morning," she called. "I didn't expect you to be up so early." "Ranch doesn't run itself." Cole drove the nail home with perhaps more force than necessary. "You didn't have to get up yet. Figured you'd sleep in after yesterday. Years of children have trained me to wake with the sun." She smiled, and even from this distance, he could see it was genuine. "I thought I'd make breakfast. It's the least I can do." "You don't have to, Cole." She said his name with gentle firmness. "We agreed. I work, you provide room and board. Let me do my job." He nodded, conceding the point, and watched her disappear back inside. 20 minutes later, when he entered the kitchen, the transformation was remarkable. She'd clearly been busy before calling out to him. The table was set with care, the coffee pot was bubbling on the stove, and the smell of frying bacon filled the air with the kind of homey warmth that made Cole's chest ache with something he couldn't name. I found eggs in the cold box, Lydia said, moving around the kitchen with the confident efficiency of someone who knew her domain. And there's bread that's only a day old. I can make more later today. I saw you have flour and yeast. How do you like your eggs? However they come. Cole stood awkwardly in the doorway of his own kitchen, suddenly unsure of where he belonged in this space that had become hers in the span of a single morning. I'm not particular. Everyone's particular about something. She cracked eggs into a skillet with practiced ease. Scrambled, then. That's safest. The children will be down soon. I heard them stirring. They're early risers too, I'm afraid. If the noise bothers you, it doesn't. The words came out faster than he'd intended, almost defensive. I mean, it's fine. It's your house too now. She glanced at him over her shoulder, and something in her expression made him feel seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly comforting. Our arrangement, you mean? Thank you for the reminder. The thunder of small feet on the stairs announced the children's arrival. Eli burst into the kitchen first, his hair sticking up in wild directions, his face alight with the kind of enthusiasm only children possessed before the world taught them to be cautious with their joy. Mr. Cole, can I see the horses now? You said maybe I could ride one. Can I? Please? After breakfast, Lydia said automatically, setting plates on the table. And it's Mr. Haverford, Eli, not Mr. Cole. Just Cole is fine, Cole found himself saying. Mr. Haverford makes me feel like my father, and that's not a feeling I'm fond of. Daniel appeared next, more subdued than his brother, his serious eyes taking in the scene with what seemed like perpetual assessment. He nodded to Cole in greeting, a gesture that was almost comically adult, and took his seat at the table without being asked. Rosie came last, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, dragging her battered doll by one arm. Up you go, sweetheart. Lydia lifted her youngest into a chair, tucking a napkin into her collar with the smooth movements of long practice. Small bites, remember? Cole watched them settle around his table, the table he'd built with his own hands 7 years ago and had eaten at alone ever since, and felt something shift in his chest. It was such a simple scene, such an ordinary moment, and yet it felt monumental in ways he couldn't articulate. 4 people who hadn't existed in his life yesterday now filled his kitchen with noise and warmth, and the kind of domestic chaos he'd thought he'd never experience. Cole? Lydia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You're going to let your eggs get cold. He sat, and they ate, and if anyone noticed that his hands shook slightly as he lifted his fork, they were kind enough not to mention it. After breakfast, while Lydia insisted on cleaning up despite Cole's protests, he took the boys out to the barn. Daniel walked beside him with that careful posture of his, while Eli raced ahead, his excitement making him practically vibrate. That one! Eli pointed at Cole's stallion, a magnificent bay with a temperament that matched his impressive size. Can I ride that one? Not unless you want your mother to skin me alive. Cole rested his arms on the stall door, studying the horse with the fond exasperation of long acquaintance. That's Thunder. He's not mean, but he's particular about who sits on him, and he's too much horse for someone just learning. I've ridden before, Daniel said quietly. In Philadelphia. Father kept a stable. Cole looked down at the boy, noting the past tense, noting the way Daniel's small shoulders squared, as if bracing for disbelief or dismissal. What did you ride? A mare named Duchess. She was old and gentle. Father said I had a good seat. The pride in his voice was unmistakable and heartbreaking in its need for validation. Then you can help your brother learn. I've got a mare called Honey. She's sweet-tempered and patient, perfect for teaching. Cole moved down the line of stalls to where a golden palomino stood, her dark eyes soft and curious. This is her. Want to say hello? The next hour passed in a haze of horseflesh and hay, of patient instruction and careful supervision. Cole found himself explaining things he'd known so long they'd become instinct. How to approach a horse, how to read its body language, how to sit in a saddle with confidence but not rigidity. Daniel proved himself competent, his previous experience evident in the way he handled himself around the animals. Eli was all enthusiasm and no technique, but he listened when Cole corrected him, and his laughter when Honey nuzzled his pockets looking for treats was infectious. They were leading the horses out to the corral when Lydia appeared, Rosie on her hip, to watch. She'd changed into a simpler dress, her hair now properly pinned, and she looked more rested than she had the day before, though shadows still lingered under her eyes. "Mama, watch," Eli called, already mounted with Cole's hand steadying him. "I'm a real cowboy." "I see that, love. Hold on tight." Her voice was warm with affection, but Cole caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her free hand pressed against her stomach as if holding something in. "He's safe," Cole said quietly, moving to stand beside her at the fence. "I won't let him fall." "I know. It's just—" She trailed off, watching as Cole led the horse in a slow circle around the corral. "I've spent so long being afraid of losing them, afraid of every risk, every danger. It's exhausting, living in fear. Can't keep them in cotton wool forever. Boys need to test themselves, need to learn what they're capable of." "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Cole watched Daniel take his turn, the boy sitting straight and proud in the saddle. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days. My father, he tried to protect me after that, kept me close, didn't let me do anything that might be dangerous. Thought he was keeping me safe." He paused, remembering. "All he did was make me afraid of the world. When he died and I had to make it on my own, I had to unlearn all that fear, had to teach myself to be brave. It would have been easier if someone had let me practice when I was young." Lydia turned to look at him, really look at him, and Cole felt exposed under that gaze. "You're a good man, Cole Haverford." "I'm a man who knows what it's like to grow up afraid. That's all." Rosie squirmed in her mother's arms, pointing at the horses. "Down, Mama. Want to see." Lydia set her daughter on the ground, keeping a firm hold on her hand as the little girl pressed against the fence rails. "Horsies," Rosie breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "You want to pet one?" Cole heard himself offer before thinking it through. "I can bring Honey over. She's gentle as a lamb." Rosie nodded enthusiastically, and Cole found himself leading the mare over after Daniel dismounted. He lifted the little girl carefully. She weighed nothing, all soft warmth and trust, and held her up so she could touch the horse's velvet nose. Honey, true to her nature, stood perfectly still, accepting the child's fumbling pats with patient grace. "Soft," Rosie whispered, her small hand stroking the mare's face. "Nice horsey." "Very nice," Cole agreed, and when he looked over at Lydia, he found her watching him with an expression that made his heart skip in his chest. Gratitude, yes, but something more. Something that made him remember he was holding her daughter, standing in his corral teaching her sons to ride, playing at being something he'd sworn he'd never try to be again. He set Rosie down perhaps more quickly than necessary, suddenly needing distance from the intimacy of the moment. "I should check on the cattle. You boys can help if you want. There's work to be done if you're interested in earning your keep." Daniel straightened immediately, eager and serious. "Yes, sir. What do we need to do?" "Let's start with the chickens. They need feeding and the eggs need collecting. Think you can handle that?" The days that followed established a rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. Cole would wake before dawn, attend to the most urgent ranch business, then return to find Lydia already up, the kitchen warm and fragrant with breakfast. They'd eat together, all 5 of them, and Cole would take the boys with him for the morning work while Lydia transformed the house with her efficient care. She was relentless in her efforts, attacking years of bachelor neglect with a determination that was almost frightening. Windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in Cole's entire tenure sparkled in the sunlight. Floors that had known only the most cursory sweeping now gleamed with regular care. She discovered linens he'd forgotten he owned, washed and aired them until they smelled of sunshine and lavender. The bare walls began to accumulate small touches, wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, curtains she made from fabric she found in the storage room, little changes that made the house feel inhabited rather than merely occupied. "You're going to work yourself to death," Cole said one afternoon, finding her on her hands and knees scrubbing the floor of what had been his study. "I'm earning my keep," she replied without looking up, her voice slightly breathless from exertion. "This room is disgraceful, Cole. When was the last time it was properly cleaned?" "Never, probably. I just closed the door and pretended it didn't exist." She sat back on her heels, pushing a stray lock of hair from her face and leaving a smudge of dust on her cheek. "Well, it exists now, and it could be lovely. Look at this wood. It's beautiful under all this grime. You could actually use it as a study instead of a storage closet. Cole leaned against the doorframe, watching her work with something that felt dangerously close to affection. You don't have to make everything perfect. I hired you for basic housekeeping, not a complete renovation. I'm not making it perfect. I'm making it a home. She said it matter-of-factly, as if there was no difference, as if the transformation she was working wasn't remarkable. Besides, it gives me something to do while the children are with you. They're enjoying themselves, you know. Daniel told me yesterday that this was the best adventure he'd ever had. It's just ranch work. To you, to them, it's freedom. It's space to run and explore and be children without worrying about propriety or what the neighbors think. She dipped her brush back in the bucket, attacking another section of floor. You're good with them, Cole. Better than you probably realize. He didn't know what to say to that, so he did what he always did when emotions got too close to the surface. He changed the subject. I'm riding out to check the north fence line. Thought I'd take the boys with me, make a day of it. That all right with you? Of course, just keep them safe, as always. Their eyes met and something passed between them. An understanding, a trust, a recognition that they were building something here that went beyond their initial agreement. Cole felt it settling into his bones, this sense of responsibility and connection, and it scared him even as it felt right. He left her to her cleaning and went to find the boys. The ride to the north pasture was an education in patience. Eli wanted to gallop everywhere, kept trying to urge his horse faster despite Cole's repeated instructions to take it slow. Daniel rode with careful competence, but his constant questions revealed how much he was trying to learn, to understand, to be useful. Why do you check the fences so often? Daniel asked as they moved along the line, Cole occasionally dismounting to hammer in a loose post or tighten wire. Because cattle are curious creatures with no sense of self-preservation. They see a weak spot, they'll push through, and then you've got strays all over creation. Lost cattle means lost money, and lost money means we can't stay, Daniel finished, his voice suddenly small. Cole stopped what he was doing and turned to look at the boy. That's not what I meant. But it's true, isn't it? If the ranch doesn't do well, you can't afford to keep us. That's why Mama works so hard. That's why I try to help as much as I can. We have to be useful, or... Daniel. Cole kept his voice gentle but firm. Look at me. The boy met his eyes, and Cole saw the weight of worry that no 8-year-old should carry. You're not here on probation. You and your mother and your siblings are not one bad season away from being turned out. You understand me? We made an agreement, and I keep my agreements. But what if, no what ifs, you're safe here. All of you. Cole reached out and gripped the boy's shoulder, feeling the tension there, the rigid control. I know you think you have to be the man of the family now that your father's gone. I know you think everything depends on you being perfect and useful and never making mistakes. But Daniel, you're 8 years old. You're allowed to just be a kid sometimes. The boy's face crumpled for just a moment before he caught himself, straightening his shoulders with visible effort. Someone has to take care of them. Mama tries, but she gets so tired, and Eli is reckless, and Rosie is so small. And you've got help now. You're not alone anymore. Cole gave the shoulder a slight shake, trying to convey certainty, safety, permanence. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. So maybe you could try trusting that just a little. Daniel nodded, not quite believing, but wanting to, and Cole felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him that was both unexpected and undeniable. These children had been through too much, lost too much, and somewhere in the past week they'd become his to protect. They continued their work, and gradually Daniel began to relax, began to ask questions that were about curiosity rather than anxiety. By the time they stopped for the lunch Lydia had packed, spreading out under the shade of a sprawling oak, the boy was almost smiling. Cole? Eli asked around a mouthful of sandwich. Mama said our pa is in heaven. Do you think he can see us from up there? Cole considered the question carefully. I think if heaven's any kind of place worth going to, then yes, he can see you, and I think he's proud of how brave you've all been. Do you think he minds that we're here with you instead of with him? I think, Cole said slowly, that any father worth the name would just want his children to be safe and happy, and you are both those things here, aren't you? Both boys nodded, and Cole felt the weight of that responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. He'd taken on more than just housing them, more than just employing their mother. He'd taken on the role of teaching them, protecting them, showing them what a man could be when he chose strength over cruelty, steadiness over abandonment. It was terrifying. It was also, he was beginning to realize exactly what he'd been missing. They returned to the house in late afternoon, the boys dusty and tired and chattering about everything they'd seen. Lydia met them at the door, and Cole noticed she'd changed again, this time into what was clearly her best dress, a deep green that brought out the gold in her eyes. "How was your expedition?" she asked, but there was something distracted in her tone, something nervous in the way her hand smoothed her skirts. "Educational," Cole replied, swinging down from his horse. "These boys are going to make fine ranch hands." "Mama, I fixed a fence," Eli announced proudly. "Cole showed me how to use the hammer and everything." "That's wonderful, darling. Now go inside and get cleaned up, all of you. We have guests coming for dinner." Cole's head snapped up. "Guests?" "Mrs. Henderson from town stopped by this afternoon. She was very interested in our arrangement here." Lydia's cheeks had gone pink. "I invited her and her husband for dinner tomorrow, but she insisted on tonight. I couldn't very well refuse." Cole felt his jaw tighten. Sarah Henderson was the town's most notorious gossip, a woman who collected other people's business like some people collected stamps. If she'd made the effort to come all the way out to the ranch, it was because the rumors about Cole and his unexpected house guests had reached a fever pitch in town. "You could have told her we weren't prepared for visitors." "I could have. But Cole, we can't avoid the town forever. People are going to talk. They probably already are. Better to face it head on, show them there's nothing improper happening here." She said it firmly, but he could see the anxiety in her eyes. "Unless you'd rather I hadn't." "No, you did right." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just wish you'd had warning. Wish you hadn't had to face her alone. I've faced worse than small-town gossips." Her smile was wry. "Besides, I thought it might help to show them I'm a respectable woman trying to make an honest living. That there's nothing scandalous about our arrangement," Cole finished. "I understand. What time are they coming?" 6 o'clock. I've already started dinner. I found a chicken I could roast, and there are vegetables from the garden. It won't be fancy, but it'll be respectable." "Lydia." He waited until she looked at him. "You don't have to prove anything to these people." "Maybe not, but I'd like to anyway." She turned to head back inside, then paused. "Cole, thank you for understanding." The Hendersons arrived precisely at 6, their wagon kicking up dust on the road long before it reached the house. Sarah Henderson was a formidable woman in her late 40s, corseted within an inch of her life and wearing the expression of someone who'd come to pass judgment. Her husband, Tom, was a quieter presence, a shopkeeper who'd learned long ago that the path of least resistance was to agree with whatever his wife said. "Mr. Haverford," Sarah said as Cole helped her down from the wagon. "How kind of you to have us. We were so surprised to hear you'd taken in lodgers. You've been such a solitary man all these years." "Mrs. Marston is my housekeeper, not a lodger," Cole corrected, keeping his voice even. "She and her children are earning their keep." Of course. Sarah's eyes were already scanning the property, taking in every detail to be reported back to town. "And where is this Mrs. Marston? I'm eager to make her acquaintance." Lydia appeared in the doorway, and Cole felt a surge of pride at the picture she made. She'd pinned her hair up in an elegant style, and the green dress made her look composed and dignified. She greeted the Hendersons with perfect propriety, her manners revealing her Eastern upbringing. "Please, come in. Dinner is nearly ready. I hope you'll forgive the simplicity. I'm still learning Mr. Haverford's kitchen." They settled in the dining room, and Cole had to admit that Lydia had worked magic in the few hours she'd had. The table was set beautifully with dishes he'd forgotten he owned, polished until they gleamed. Candles provided soft light, and the smell of roasting chicken filled the house with warmth. The children had been scrubbed and dressed in their best clothes, their hair combed into submission. They sat quietly, on their best behavior, though Cole could see Eli practically vibrating with the effort of containing his natural exuberance. Dinner conversation was a careful dance. Sarah asked questions that were just barely this side of intrusive, probing into Lydia's background, her late husband, her reasons for coming to Texas. Lydia answered with grace, revealing enough to satisfy without giving away anything too personal. "And you're comfortable with this arrangement?" Sarah asked, her tone suggesting she couldn't imagine how anyone could be. "Living out here so far from town, with only Mr. Haverford for company?" "Mr. Haverford has been nothing but respectful and generous," Lydia said firmly. "My children and I have our own space upstairs, complete privacy. He's given us a chance to start over when we had nowhere else to turn. I consider myself very fortunate." "Still, people will talk. You must know that." "People always talk, Mrs. Henderson. I've found that the only way to combat gossip is to live in a way that gives it no foothold." Lydia's smile was pleasant, but her eyes were steel. "There's nothing improper happening under this roof. I do my job, Mr. Haverford does his, and my children are safe and cared for. That's all that matters." Sarah looked like she wanted to push further, but Tom intervened, changing the subject to ranch business and giving everyone a chance to breathe. The rest of dinner passed more smoothly, though Cole noticed Sarah's eyes constantly moving, cataloging details, storing up observations to be shared with her friends. After the Hendersons left, Lydia sagged against the closed door, the confident facade crumbling to reveal exhaustion. "You were magnificent," Cole said quietly. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "I was terrified. Did you see the way she looked at everything, like she was taking inventory for evidence? You handled her perfectly, better than I could have." "Cole." She pushed away from the door and moved to start clearing the table. "She's going to tell everyone in town that we're living in sin. You know that, right? No matter what I said, no matter how proper everything appeared, she's already decided we're scandalous. Let her talk. We know the truth." "Do we?" She stopped, a plate in her hands, and looked at him with something raw and honest in her eyes. "Cole, this is your reputation too. You're standing in the community. If people think I stopped caring what people think a long time ago." He took the plate from her hands and set it down, then caught her shoulders gently. "Lydia, listen to me. I don't regret bringing you here, not for a second. And I don't care what Sarah Henderson or anyone else in town says about it. You might not now, but what about in a month, 6 months? When you can't go to town without whispers following you? When people treat you differently because of us? Then they'll treat me differently. I'll survive." He gave her shoulders a slight squeeze before releasing her. "You're worrying about things that haven't happened yet. We'll deal with whatever comes together. That was the agreement, wasn't it?" She nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her body. "Together. Yes. Thank you, Cole." That night, after the children were in bed and Lydia had finally stopped cleaning, Cole sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. He heard the door open behind him, heard her light footsteps, but didn't turn around. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Thinking. About Mrs. Henderson's visit? About how much has changed in a week." He glanced over at her, this woman who'd arrived with nothing, and was somehow filling every empty space in his life. "A week ago, I was alone. Now I've got 3 kids calling me by my first name and a woman who's turning my house into a home despite my best efforts to live like a hermit." She smiled. "Having second thoughts?" "No, that's what I'm thinking about. I should be having second thoughts. I should be panicking about what I've done. But instead I'm sitting here feeling content. And that terrifies me more than any amount of gossip ever could." "Why does it terrify you?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, weighing whether to tell her, whether to reveal the wounds he'd kept hidden for so long. But something about the darkness, about her presence beside him, made the words come easier. "I was engaged once. Her name was Margaret. We were going to get married, fill this house with family, build something together." He stared out at the darkness, seeing ghosts. "She died 3 weeks before the wedding. Riding accident. Her horse spooked and threw her, and she broke her neck in the fall." "Oh, Cole." Lydia's voice was soft with sympathy. "I built this house for her. All these rooms, all this space. And then she was gone. And I was left with a monument to a future that would never happen. So I shut myself off. Decided it was easier to be alone than to risk that kind of loss again." "And now you're afraid," Lydia said quietly. "Afraid that if you let yourself care about us, we'll be taken away too." "Something like that." She reached over and took his hand, the gesture simple and profound. I can't promise we'll be here forever. Life is uncertain and loss is always possible. But Cole, you can't live in fear of what might happen. That's not living, that's just waiting to die. Wise words from someone who admitted to living in fear just this morning. She laughed softly. I suppose we're both learning then. Learning to be brave together. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. And Cole thought maybe, just maybe, he could learn to hope again. Maybe he could learn to build something new on the foundation of old grief. Maybe he could let himself believe that this time, this family that had arrived unexpected and uninvited might stay. Lydia? I'm glad you arrived with 3 children. I'm glad I had room for 4. She squeezed his hand, and in the darkness, Cole could see her smile. So am I, Cole. So am I. Spring arrived in Texas the way it always did, sudden and dramatic, transforming the brown landscape into something green and alive almost overnight. The wildflowers came first, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush carpeting the hills in waves of color that made even Cole's practical heart catch in his chest. The cattle grew fat on new grass, the horses shed their winter coats, and the ranch hummed with the energy of renewal. 3 months had passed since that first dinner with the Hendersons. 3 months of establishing routines and breaking down walls that Cole hadn't even realized he'd built. The house had become unrecognizable, not just clean but lived in, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the smell of Lydia's cooking, and the sense that these walls finally understood their purpose. The town had indeed talked, just as Lydia had predicted. Sarah Henderson had done her work well, spreading whispers that ranged from mildly scandalous to outright fabricated. But Cole had meant what he said. He didn't care. He went to town for supplies once a week, endured the stares and the carefully turned backs, and returned to the ranch where life made sense. Lydia had proven herself invaluable in ways that went far beyond housekeeping. She had a head for numbers that Cole lacked, and she'd taken over the ranch accounts with his blessing, organizing his chaotic record-keeping into something that actually made sense. She'd also started a garden that was already showing promise, neat rows of vegetables that would supplement their meals and save money at the general store. The children had transformed too. Daniel had lost some of that rigid control, allowing himself moments of boyish abandon that made Cole's chest tight with satisfaction. Just yesterday, he'd caught the boy laughing, really laughing, bent over with it, at something Eli had said, and the sound had been like music. Eli himself had channeled his boundless energy into ranch work, following Cole around like an enthusiastic shadow, absorbing everything he could about horses and cattle and the business of running a spread. And Rosie had attached herself to Cole with the complete trust that only small children possessed, climbing into his lap at dinner, demanding stories before bed, calling him my Cole in a way that melted every defense he'd ever constructed. It was the kind of life Cole had once dreamed of and then convinced himself he didn't deserve. Now it was his reality, and he woke each morning with something that felt dangerously close to happiness. Which was why, when Mark Ellery rode up to the ranch on a bright April morning, Cole felt the first stirrings of unease. He was working in the corral when he saw the rider approaching, recognized the horse before he recognized the man. Ellery owned the neighboring spread, the Triple E, a prosperous operation that dwarfed Cole's modest holdings. He was a good rancher, a fair neighbor, and by all accounts a decent man. He was also a widower, 35 years old and in the market for a wife, if the rumors were to be believed. Haverford, Ellery called out as he dismounted, his voice friendly. Hope I'm not interrupting. Just working with one of the yearlings. Cole climbed down from the fence, wiping his hands on his pants. What brings you out this way? Had business in town. Thought I'd stop by on my way back. Ellery's eyes moved past Cole to the house, where Lydia had appeared on the porch, alerted by the sound of an unfamiliar voice. Actually, I was hoping to meet your housekeeper. Heard quite a bit about her. Cole felt his jaw tighten. I'm sure you have. If Ellery noticed the edge in Cole's voice, he didn't acknowledge it. He was already moving toward the house, his hat in his hands, his expression arranged into something pleasant and interested. Cole had no choice but to follow, feeling like a storm cloud gathering on an otherwise clear day. Mrs. Marston, Ellery said, mounting the porch steps with easy confidence. Mark Ellery. I own the Triple E, about 10 miles west of here. I've been meaning to ride over and introduce myself properly. Lydia had that careful politeness in her expression that Cole had come to recognize as her shield against unwanted attention. Mr. Ellery, it's kind of you to visit. I heard you and your children arrived from Philadelphia. Must be quite a change coming to Texas. It's been an adjustment, certainly. But we're settling in well. I'm glad to hear it. Cole's a good man, keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair and honest. You couldn't ask for a better employer. Ellery's smile was warm, genuine. I also heard you might be coming to the spring social next week. The whole county turns out. It's quite an event. Cole hadn't heard anything about a spring social, and judging by the surprised look Lydia shot him, neither had she. But she recovered quickly, her manners too ingrained to let confusion show for long. I hadn't heard about it, actually. We've been rather occupied with settling in. It's next Saturday at the church hall. Music, dancing, food, everyone brings something to share. It's a good chance to meet people, feel part of the community. Ellery's eyes were fixed on Lydia with an intensity that made Cole want to step between them. I hope you'll consider coming. It would be nice to see a new face, and I'm sure folks would like to meet you properly, away from all the gossip and speculation. That's very kind, Mr. Ellery, but... We'll think about it, Cole interrupted, his voice harder than he'd intended. Mrs. Marston has quite a bit of work to manage here. Social events aren't really a priority. Ellery turned to look at him, and something flickered in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or challenge. Of course, but everyone needs a break from work sometimes, don't they? Even housekeepers. He turned back to Lydia. The invitation stands, Mrs. Marston. If you decide to come, I'd be honored if you'd save me a dance. He left soon after, riding away with a wave and a promise to stop by again soon. Cole watched him go with a feeling in his gut that he recognized as jealousy, irrational, unwelcome, and undeniable. That was unexpected, Lydia said quietly beside him. He's got a reputation as a ladies' man, smooth talker, always knows the right thing to say. He seemed pleasant enough. Pleasant. Cole turned to look at her, searching her face for something he couldn't name. Is that what you thought of him? Pleasant? Lydia's eyebrows rose slightly. I barely met the man, Cole. I'm hardly in a position to form an opinion. She paused, studying him with that perceptive gaze that always made him feel transparent. Did his visit bother you? No. Yes. I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. I just don't like the idea of him coming around here with his invitations and his charm. Are you saying I shouldn't go to the social? I'm saying you should do what you want, but people will talk if you show up with him, and they already talk enough. They'll talk no matter what I do. Her voice was gentle but firm. Cole, I can't hide on this ranch forever, and maybe Mr. Ellery is right. Maybe it would be good to meet people properly, show them I'm not some fallen woman living scandalously. Cole wanted to argue, wanted to find reasons why she should stay here, safe on the ranch where she belonged, but he had no claim on her beyond their business arrangement, no right to dictate her social life or object to other men's interest. The realization sat bitter in his mouth. Do what you think is best, he said finally, and walked away before she could see what was written on his face. The week that followed was tense in ways that Cole couldn't quite articulate. Lydia threw herself into preparations for the social, enlisting the children's help in making a pie to bring and altering one of her dresses to make it more suitable for dancing. She didn't ask Cole if he was going, maybe because she knew the answer, maybe because she'd decided it didn't matter. Cole buried himself in ranch work, riding out at dawn and not returning until after dark, eating the dinners Lydia left warming on the stove in solitude. He told himself he was busy, that spring was a demanding time on a ranch, that the distance between them was necessary and appropriate. But at night, lying in his narrow bed, he couldn't escape the truth. He was in love with her. The realization shouldn't have been surprising. He'd been falling since the day she arrived, drawn in by her strength and her grace and the way she'd brought his house to life. But acknowledging it made it real, and real meant vulnerable. And vulnerable meant the possibility of loss that he'd sworn never to risk again. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, the kind of spring day that made people believe in new beginnings. Cole watched from the barn as Lydia and the children prepared to leave, watched Lydia settle the pie carefully in a basket and help Rosie into her best dress. The boys were scrubbed and combed, excited about the prospect of other children to play with and treats to eat. "Cole?" Lydia's voice carried across the yard. "Are you sure you won't come?" He emerged from the barn, keeping his distance. "Not my kind of thing? You all have fun." She looked like she wanted to say something more, her eyes searching his face for something he wasn't ready to give. But then Daniel called out that they needed to leave if they wanted to arrive on time, and the moment passed. Cole watched their wagon disappear down the road, dust settling in its wake, and then he was alone. Completely, utterly alone, in a house that suddenly felt cavernous and empty despite all of Lydia's efforts to make it a home. He tried to work. He mucked out stalls that didn't need mucking, repaired fence that wasn't broken, did everything he could think of to keep his mind occupied. But his thoughts kept drifting to the social, to Lydia in her altered dress, to Mark Ellery with his smooth words and his clear interest. By late afternoon, Cole found himself saddling Thunder with hands that shook slightly. He told himself he was just checking on them, making sure they were all right. He told himself it was the responsible thing to do, the protective thing, what any employer would do for his housekeeper and her children. He didn't examine too closely why he needed his best shirt for such an errand. The church hall was packed when he arrived, wagons and horses filling every available space. Music drifted through the open windows, a fiddle and a guitar playing something lively that had people clapping along. Cole dismounted slowly, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the ride. Inside, the hall had been transformed. Long tables lined the walls, laden with food that represented every family's best efforts. The center of the room had been cleared for dancing, and couples spun across the floor with varying degrees of grace. Children raced between the adults, playing games that involved much shrieking and laughter. The whole scene was warm and alive, and everything Cole usually avoided. He spotted the children first. Eli and Daniel were with a group of boys their age, engaged in some kind of game that involved a ball and much running. Rosie sat with several other small girls, playing with a set of dolls someone had brought. They looked happy, integrated, like they belonged. Then he saw Lydia, and his breath caught in his chest. She stood near the refreshment table, talking with a group of women who'd probably come over to satisfy their curiosity about the scandalous housekeeper. She wore a dress of pale blue that brought out the gold in her eyes, and she'd done something different with her hair, pulling it back in a way that exposed the elegant line of her neck. She was laughing at something someone had said, her whole face alight with it, and she was so beautiful it made Cole's chest ache. And beside her, close enough to be proprietary, stood Mark Ellery. Cole watched as Ellery leaned in to say something to Lydia, watched her smile in response, watched him offer his arm as the music changed to something slower. She hesitated for just a moment, glancing around the room as if looking for someone, and Cole could have sworn her eyes passed over him without recognition. Then she placed her hand on Ellery's arm and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. They moved together well, Ellery's hand at her waist, her hand in his, their steps in easy rhythm. They talked as they danced, Lydia's head tilted to hear him better, Ellery's expression warm and interested. To anyone watching, they looked like exactly what they were: a man courting a woman, testing the waters of potential romance. Cole felt something dark and fierce rise in his chest, something possessive and irrational that he had no right to feel. She wasn't his. She'd never been his. She was his housekeeper, his employee, a woman he'd offered shelter to out of basic human decency. That she'd become more, that she'd become everything, was his problem, not hers. He should leave. He should walk out of this hall and ride back to the ranch, and accept that Lydia Marston deserved better than a broken-down cowboy who'd sworn off love and family. Mark Ellery was the better choice. Prosperous, charming, ready to offer marriage and security, and a life without the stain of scandal. Cole was turning to go when he heard the scream. It came from outside, high and terrified, a child's voice cutting through the music and laughter like a knife. The dancing stopped immediately, heads turning toward the sound, and then people were running, pushing through the doors in a confused mass. Cole was already moving, his body responding before his mind fully processed what was happening. He broke through the crowd and saw them. A knot of people gathered near the side of the building, and in the center, lying terrifyingly still on the ground, was Eli. "Move!" Cole's voice was harsh, commanding, and people scattered before him like leaves. He dropped to his knees beside the boy, his hands already checking for injuries, his mind cataloging what he saw with the cold precision of someone who'd seen accidents before. Eli had fallen from the loft window about 15 feet up, where the children had apparently been playing despite warnings to stay on the ground. He was unconscious, a gash on his forehead bleeding freely, his left arm bent at an unnatural angle. But he was breathing. Cole could see the shallow rise and fall of his chest, and that meant there was hope. Eli! Lydia's voice raw with terror, and then she was there, trying to gather her son into her arms. Don't move him, Cole said sharply, catching her hands. Lydia, don't move him. His arm's broken and we don't know what else is injured. Moving him could make it worse. He's not waking up. Cole, he's not waking up. Her voice broke on a sob, and Cole saw the naked fear in her eyes. The same fear he'd seen in his father after his mother died. The fear of losing someone you couldn't bear to lose. Someone get the doctor, Cole called out, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. Now! Doc's in Austin for the week, someone called back. Won't be back until Monday. Cole cursed under his breath. Austin was 3 hours away in good conditions. By the time someone rode there and brought a doctor back, it would be too late if Eli had internal injuries. They needed to move fast. We take him to Austin, Cole decided. I'll drive the wagon. Lydia, you ride with me and keep him stable. Daniel, Rosie, I'll watch them, a voice said, and Cole looked up to see Mark Ellery, his face pale but composed. You get the boy to the doctor. I'll make sure his siblings are taken care of. Cole wanted to refuse, wanted to insist on some other arrangement, but there was no time for jealousy or pride. He nodded curtly and then focused on the task at hand. With help from several men, they rigged a makeshift stretcher from someone's blanket and carefully, so carefully, transferred Eli to Cole's wagon. Lydia climbed in beside her son, cradling his head in her lap, and Cole took the reins with hands that were rock steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. Hold on, he told her, and then he was driving, pushing the horses as fast as he dared on roads that were rough and unpredictable. The journey to Austin was the longest 3 hours of Cole's life. Behind him, he could hear Lydia talking to her unconscious son, her voice breaking as she told him stories, sang songs, begged him to wake up. Eli remained still, his breathing shallow but steady, the blood from his head wound soaking through the bandages someone had hastily applied. Cole drove like a man possessed, navigating by instinct more than sight as dusk fell and the roads became treacherous in the fading light. His arms ached from gripping the reins. His back screamed from the tension, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. This boy who'd followed him around the ranch with endless questions, who'd laughed at his terrible jokes and tried so hard to be brave, this boy was not going to die. Cole would drive through hell itself if that's what it took to get him to safety. Cole, Lydia's voice small and broken. What if we're too late? What if he... Don't. Cole didn't take his eyes off the road. Don't think that way. He's strong, Lydia. He's going to be fine. You don't know that. Yes, I do. And Cole realized he believed it, needed to believe it with a desperation that surprised him. He's your son. He's got your strength, your stubbornness. He's not giving up, and neither are we. They reached Austin just after 8 o'clock, the town lit by lanterns and the last gasp of twilight. Cole drove straight to the doctor's house, barely bringing the wagon to a stop before he was pounding on the door. Dr. Samuel Morrison was a man in his 60s, experienced and unflappable. He took one look at Eli and immediately directed them to bring him inside to his examination room. Cole carried the boy as if he weighed nothing, following the doctor's instructions, barely aware of Lydia beside him, her hand clutching his arm. You'll need to wait outside, Dr. Morrison said, already examining Eli with practiced efficiency. I'll do everything I can. I'm staying, Lydia said, her voice leaving no room for argument. The doctor nodded, understanding. You then. He looked at Cole. You should wait in the parlor. This may take some time. Cole wanted to protest, wanted to stay, to somehow will Eli back to consciousness through sheer force of presence. But he saw the determination in Lydia's face, saw that she needed to be there for her son, and he made himself step back. I'll be right outside, he told her. If you need anything. I know. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw gratitude and fear and something else, something deeper. "Thank you, Cole, for getting us here, for—" Her voice broke. "For everything." He left because he had to, because staying would have meant gathering her into his arms and never letting go. And this wasn't the time or place for such declarations. Instead, he paced the doctor's small parlor, wearing a path in the rug, while behind a closed door, the fate of a 6-year-old boy hung in the balance. Time lost meaning. Cole marked its passage by the sounds that filtered through the door. Low voices, Lydia's occasional sob, the clink of medical instruments. He prayed, though he hadn't prayed in years, making desperate bargains with a God he'd stopped believing in after Margaret died. It was after midnight when the door finally opened. Dr. Morrison emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, his expression carefully neutral. Cole was on his feet immediately, his heart in his throat. "The boy is stable," the doctor said, and Cole felt his knees go weak with relief. He has a concussion, which is why he hasn't regained consciousness. His left arm is broken in 2 places. I've set it and splinted it. He has some bruising that suggests internal trauma, but I don't believe anything is ruptured. He's young and healthy, which works in his favor. When will he wake up? Could be hours, could be days. Concussions are unpredictable, but his vital signs are good, and I'm cautiously optimistic. He'll need to stay here for observation, at least for tonight. His mother is with him now. Cole nodded, the tight band around his chest loosening slightly. "Can I see him?" "Briefly, but Mrs. Marston needs rest as well. She's exhausted. See if you can convince her to lie down." The examination room had been converted into a makeshift bedroom. Eli lay in a narrow bed, looking impossibly small and fragile, his arm wrapped and splinted, a bandage around his head. His face was pale but peaceful, his breathing steady. Lydia sat beside him, her hand holding his good one, her face ravaged by tears and fear. "Lydia," Cole said softly. She looked up, and the expression on her face nearly broke him. "The doctor says he'll be all right. He says Eli will wake up." "Then he will. Dr. Morrison is good at his job." "What if he doesn't? Cole, what if this is my fault? I should have been watching him more carefully. I should have known he'd find some way to climb where he shouldn't." "Stop." Cole crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her free hand in both of his. "This is not your fault. Boys climb things. It's what they do. You can't watch them every second. This was an accident, nothing more. I can't lose him. I can't lose another person I love. I can't." "You won't." Cole said it with absolute certainty, willing her to believe him. "He's going to be fine. He's going to wake up and ask for food and complain about having to lie still, and you're going to want to throttle him for scaring you." A sound escaped her that was half laugh, half sob. She sagged forward, and Cole caught her, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face against his shoulder and wept. Great tearing sobs that shook her whole body, and Cole held her through it, one hand stroking her hair, his own eyes burning. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you, and I've got him. You're not alone, Lydia. You're not alone anymore." They stayed like that for a long time, Lydia crying out her fear and exhaustion, Cole holding her steady. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red and swollen, but calmer. "You should rest," Cole said gently. "There's a cot in the corner. Dr. Morrison said, I'm not leaving him." "Then rest in the chair. But you need sleep, Lydia. Eli's going to need you when he wakes up, and you'll be no good to him if you're dead on your feet." She nodded reluctantly and settled back in the chair, her hand still holding Eli's. Cole draped a blanket over her shoulders and then took up position in the other chair, prepared to keep vigil through the long night ahead. "Cole?" Lydia's voice was drowsy, fading towards sleep. "Why did you come to the social? I thought you said it wasn't your kind of thing." Cole looked at her, at this woman who'd upended his entire life, and knew the time for lies was past. "I came because you were there. Because the thought of Mark Ellery dancing with you made me want to put my fist through a wall. Because somewhere in the last 3 months, you stopped being my housekeeper and became—" He trailed off, the words too large and too dangerous to speak aloud. But Lydia's eyes were closed, her breathing even. She'd fallen asleep before hearing his confession, and Cole told himself it was better that way. There would be time later, when Eli was well, to address what was growing between them. For now, he would watch over them both, these two people who'd become essential to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Dawn was breaking, painting the room in shades of pink and gold when Eli stirred. It was slight at first, just a twitch of his fingers, but Cole saw it and immediately leaned forward. "Eli?" he said quietly. "Can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered, opened halfway, unfocused and confused. "Cole?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Where?" "You're safe. You fell, but you're going to be fine. Just lie still." "Mama?" "Right here." Lydia was awake instantly, leaning over her son, tears streaming down her face. "Right here, darling. Oh, thank God. Thank God." Eli's eyes drifted closed again, but his breathing remained steady, natural sleep rather than unconsciousness. Dr. Morrison, arriving to check on his patient, confirmed that this was a good sign, that the boy had turned a corner. "He'll need several weeks to heal," the doctor told them. "The arm will take longest, and he needs to rest until the concussion symptoms subside. But barring complications, he should make a full recovery." Cole felt something inside him unknot, a tension he'd been carrying since he first saw Eli lying on the ground. The boy would be fine. They'd made it in time. The desperate race through the darkness had been worth it. Lydia's hand found his, her fingers lacing through his own. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. The gratitude, the relief, the bone-deep exhaustion, it was all there in her grip, in the way she leaned slightly against his shoulder. And Cole held on, letting himself be what she needed, accepting finally that he'd stopped being alone the day she arrived with 3 children and he'd had room for 4. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced from town gossip or Mark Ellery's courtship or the complications of their impossible situation, they would face it together. Because that's what family did. And somehow, without either of them quite intending it, that's what they'd become. They stayed in Austin for 3 days while Eli recovered enough to travel. Dr. Morrison had arranged for them to take rooms at a boarding house run by his sister, a kind woman who brought them meals and asked no uncomfortable questions about the nature of their relationship. Cole barely left except to check on the horses and send word back to the ranch via a telegram to a neighboring farmer, asking him to look after the place and reassure Daniel and Rosie that their brother would be fine. During those 3 days, something fundamental shifted between Cole and Lydia. Perhaps it was the intimacy of shared crisis, the way they'd sat together through long hours while Eli slept. Perhaps it was the exhaustion that stripped away pretense and left only raw honesty. Or perhaps it was simply that the thing growing between them had finally reached a point where it could no longer be ignored or explained away as mere gratitude or propriety. They talked during those long vigils, really talked in ways they hadn't before. Lydia told him about her marriage to Marcus, about how she'd been young and desperate for security after her parents died, about how kindness and passion were 2 different things, and she'd had one, but never the other. Cole told her about Margaret, about the guilt he'd carried for years, convinced that if he'd been with her that day, if he'd somehow prevented her from riding alone, she might still be alive. "You can't save everyone," Lydia said softly on the second night, when Eli was sleeping peacefully and they sat in chairs pulled close together, their voices low in the darkness. "Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no one to blame, no way to prevent them. You just have to survive them and try to find meaning on the other side." "Is that what you're doing? Finding meaning?" "I'm trying. Some days are easier than others." She looked at him, her face barely visible in the lamplight. "You've given me that chance, Cole. You've given all of us that chance. Whatever happens next, I want you to know I'm grateful." Grateful. The word tasted bitter on his tongue. "Is that all?" She was quiet for a long moment, and Cole cursed himself for pushing, for revealing too much. But then her hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cool and certain. "No," she said quietly. "That's not all. But Cole, I'm still married in the eyes of God, even if Marcus is gone. I have 3 children who depend on me. I can't afford to be reckless with my heart or my reputation, and you." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You've been hurt badly. I won't be the cause of more pain. What if you're the cure?" Cole turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together. What if all this time I've been alone wasn't about staying safe, but about waiting for the right reason to risk everything? Cole, I'm not asking for anything you can't give. I'm just telling you the truth. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was both chaste and full of promise. When I saw Eli lying on that ground, when I thought we might lose him, all I could think was that I couldn't bear it. Not just because he's a good kid who deserves a full life, but because he's yours. Because losing him would break you, and you breaking would break me. That's when I knew. Knew what? That I love you. That I love all of you. You and Daniel and Eli and Rosie. That somewhere along the way, my house stopped being mine and became ours. That I don't want to go back to the way things were, not ever. Lydia's breath caught, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You can't say things like that. Why not? It's the truth. Because it makes me want things I have no right to want. Because it makes me hope for a future that might not be possible. Because, Cole, even if we both want this, the world we live in has rules. I'm your employee. People already talk. If we were to... She shook her head, unable to finish the thought. Then let them talk. We'll do this right, Lydia. I'll court you properly. We'll wait a respectable amount of time. We'll make it so clear that everything between us is honorable that even Sarah Henderson won't be able to find fault. And then, when enough time has passed, when you're ready, I'll ask you to marry me. If you'll have me. You're proposing a proposal? Despite everything, she laughed, the sound watery but genuine. That's very methodical of you. I'm a practical man. I like to plan ahead. He squeezed her hand gently. But I'm also patient. I waited 5 years being alone before you arrived. I can wait as long as you need to be sure this is what you want. I'm sure of you, she said quietly. I'm sure of how you make me feel safe. How my children have blossomed under your care. How you've shown us kindness when the world has been cruel. I'm just not sure the world will let us have this. The world doesn't get a vote. Only you do. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that until dawn, hands linked, hearts cautiously opening to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they deserved a second chance at happiness. On the fourth day, Dr. Morrison declared Eli well enough to travel if they took it slowly. The boy was already restless with forced bed rest, his natural energy reasserting itself despite his injuries. His arm was secured in a proper cast that would need to stay on for at least 6 weeks, and he had strict instructions to avoid climbing, running, or any activity that might result in another head injury. But I can still help with the chickens, right? Eli asked Cole anxiously as they prepared to leave. And I can visit the horses. You can visit the horses from outside the stall, and yes, chicken duty is probably safe enough, as long as you don't try to ride them. Cole ruffled the boy's hair gently, careful to avoid the healing wound. You scared us pretty badly, kid. Your mother's probably going to keep you wrapped in cotton wool for the foreseeable future. I'm sorry. Eli's voice went small, his eyes dropping to his cast. I didn't mean to fall. I was just trying to see if I could reach the bird's nest, and the ledge was slippery, and... Hey! Cole knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Accidents happen. You didn't do anything wrong, but you did learn an important lesson about gravity and the consequences of risky behavior, didn't you? Eli nodded solemnly. Gravity always wins. That's right. Remember that, and we'll be fine. The journey back to the ranch was slow and careful, Cole driving with painstaking caution to avoid jostling Eli. Lydia sat in the back of the wagon with her son, cushioning him with blankets and pillows, her hand never far from his shoulder. They stopped frequently to rest, turning what should have been a 3-hour journey into a 6-hour ordeal that had them arriving at the ranch well after dark. Daniel and Rosie were waiting on the porch with Mark Ellery, who'd apparently taken his promise to watch over them seriously. The neighboring farmer Cole had telegraphed was there too, along with his wife, and they'd clearly been keeping the children fed and the ranch running in Cole's absence. The reunion was tearful and joyful, Rosie launching herself at her mother with enough force to nearly knock Lydia over, Daniel wrapping his arms around Eli with the fierce protectiveness of an older brother who'd been terrified he might lose his sibling. Even with his injuries, Eli was grinning, basking in the attention and promising to tell them all about the doctor's house and the big city and everything he'd seen. "Welcome home," Ellery said to Cole, his voice carefully neutral. "The Mitchells here have been taking good care of things. Your stock is all accounted for, and there haven't been any problems. I appreciate it." Cole shook hands with both men, nodding his thanks to Mrs. Mitchell, who was already heading into the house with Lydia to help get Eli settled. "And I appreciate you staying with the children. That was above and beyond." Ellery studied him for a moment, and something passed across his face. Resignation, perhaps, or understanding. "She's a special woman, your Mrs. Marston. The children are a credit to her." "Yes, she is. She was terrified, when the boy fell. I've never seen someone so afraid." Ellery's eyes met Cole's directly. "But the moment you arrived, she calmed down. She trusted you to fix it, to make it right. That kind of trust, well, that means something." Cole heard what wasn't being said, heard Ellery stepping back from whatever courtship he'd been contemplating. "I'm planning to marry her when enough time has passed to make it respectable. When she's ready." "Thought you might be." Ellery's smile was wry but not unkind. "She's lucky to have you. You're both lucky if you're smart enough to recognize it." He clapped Cole on the shoulder and mounted his horse. "Take care of them, Haverford. Don't make me regret backing off." After everyone had left and the children were in bed, Cole and Lydia finally had a moment alone. She found him on the porch, standing in his usual spot, looking out at the darkness beyond the reach of the lamplight. "Eli's asleep," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "He's exhausted, but happy. He told Daniel he'd had an adventure and that you were the bravest man in Texas. I just drove fast. Anyone could have done it. But they didn't. You did." She was quiet for a moment, and Cole could feel her gathering courage for something. "Mark Ellery stopped by the house while you were putting away the horses. He wanted to say goodbye." Cole's jaw tightened. "Did he?" "He told me he'd been planning to court me seriously, that he thought we might make a good match. His prosperity and my need for security." She turned to look at Cole, and even in the darkness, he could see the softness in her eyes. "He said he could see that my heart was already engaged elsewhere, and that he was gentleman enough to step aside." "Is he right? Is your heart engaged elsewhere?" "You know it is." She said it simply, without artifice or coyness. "I tried not to let it happen, Cole. I told myself it was gratitude, that I was confused by everything you'd done for us. But these past few days in Austin, sitting with you while Eli recovered, talking about things I've never told anyone, I can't deny it anymore." Cole turned to face her fully, his heart pounding so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. "Lydia, wait. Let me finish." She took a deep breath, her hands twisting together nervously. "I know we talked about courting properly, about waiting a respectable amount of time, and we should do that. We will do that. But Cole, I need you to know that when you do ask me to marry you, whenever that is, the answer will be yes. It will always be yes." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "Lydia Marston, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. I'm really not. I'm just someone who's trying to survive and who's been lucky enough to find someone willing to survive with me. You're brave and strong, and you've taken 3 children through hell and kept them whole. You've taken my broken-down existence and made it into something worth living. You're everything I thought I'd lost the right to have." His forehead touched hers, and they stood like that, breathing the same air, hearts beating in rhythm. "I love you. I love all of you. And I promise you I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. I could never regret you." Her hands came up to cover his, holding him there. "You saved us, Cole. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me right back." He kissed her then, finally. A kiss that was gentle and fierce and full of promises they were both ready to keep. It wasn't proper. They weren't engaged, weren't even officially courting, but it felt right in a way that transcended rules and expectations. It felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lydia laughed shakily. "So much for a respectable courtship. We'll start tomorrow. Tonight, I just needed you to know." "I do know. I've known for a while, I think. I was just too afraid to believe it was real." They stood together on the porch as the Texas night deepened around them, and for the first time since she'd arrived on that train platform months ago, Lydia let herself believe in the future. Not the desperate scrambling survival she'd been practicing, but an actual future filled with possibility and hope and love. The weeks that followed Eli's accident settled into a new normal, one that acknowledged the change in their relationship even as they maintained appropriate boundaries. Cole began courting Lydia with a formal correctness that would have been comical if it hadn't been so sincere. He asked permission before taking her hand. He sat on the opposite end of the porch when they talked in the evenings. He brought her wildflowers from the fields and complimented her cooking with the earnest awkwardness of a man who'd forgotten how to woo a woman. The children watched this courtship with varying degrees of amusement and approval. Daniel, serious as always, seemed relieved that the undefined tension in the household had finally crystallized into something he could understand. Eli, once he'd recovered enough to be troublesome again, teased them mercilessly until Lydia threatened to add extra chores to his daily list. And Rosie, in the way of small children who saw truths adults tried to hide, had taken to calling Cole Papa when she thought no one was listening. The first time Cole heard it, he'd frozen in place, his whole body going rigid with emotion he couldn't name. Lydia had been there, had seen his reaction, and her eyes had filled with tears. "I'll talk to her," she'd said quietly. "I'll explain that you're not her father, that she can't just—" "Don't." Cole's voice had been rough, scraped raw by feeling. "Don't tell her to stop. I don't mind, if that's what she wants to call me." "Are you sure?" "Cole, that's a big thing. If she gets used to thinking of you that way and something happens, if we somehow—" "Nothing's going to happen. I told you I'm in this, Lydia, all the way in. If Rosie wants to call me Papa, then I'll be her Papa. I'll be whatever all of you need me to be." So Rosie continued calling him Papa, at first tentatively and then with growing confidence, until it became natural. Eli followed suit, though Daniel held back, still loyal to the memory of the father he'd lost. Cole didn't push, understanding that the boy needed time to work through his grief and accept that loving someone new didn't mean forgetting someone who'd come before. The town's reaction to their situation evolved slowly. Sarah Henderson and her circle of friends maintained their disapproval, but others began to soften as they saw how the arrangement actually worked. The children were clearly thriving. Anyone who'd known them in those first desperate weeks could see the transformation. They were healthy, happy, secure. Lydia was respected for her dignity and her obvious devotion to her family, and Cole, who'd been seen as a tragic hermit for years, had become something softer, more approachable, more human. It was the church ladies who finally tipped the scales. Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, paid a call one afternoon about 6 weeks after Eli's accident. Lydia received her nervously, certain this was another interrogation disguised as a social visit, but Mrs. Patterson had something else in mind. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Marston," she said once they were settled with tea. "I know there's been talk about your situation here. I also know that talk is often uncharitable and uninformed. I've been watching you and your children at church these past months, and I've seen nothing but propriety and genuine faith. Mr. Haverford is a good man who's been given a second chance at happiness, and you're a good woman trying to build a life for your children. I see no scandal in that." Lydia had blinked back tears, overwhelmed by this unexpected support. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means more than you know. What I'm saying is that not everyone in town believes the worst of you. In fact, I'd venture that most people are rooting for you to succeed here. For you and Mr. Haverford both." Mrs. Patterson had smiled knowingly. "We all have eyes, dear. We can see what's growing between you. And while I'm sure you'll observe all proper proprieties, I want you to know that when the time comes, when Mr. Haverford makes his intentions official, you'll have friends in this community who will celebrate with you, not condemn you." The conversation had given Lydia hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build a life together that the town would accept. She'd told Cole about it that evening, and he'd listened with the careful attention he gave to everything she said. "Does that mean you're ready?" he'd asked. "Ready for me to make things official?" "Cole, we've only been formally courting for 6 weeks. People will say—" "I don't care what people will say. I care what you want, what you need." He'd taken her hands in his, holding them gently. If you want me to wait a year, 2 years, I'll wait. But Lydia, I've already waited 5 years being alone before you arrived. I know what I want. The only question is whether you're ready to take that step. She'd looked at him, this man who'd opened his home and his heart to her and her children, who'd proven himself in 1,000 small ways every single day. And she'd known with absolute certainty that she didn't want to wait either. Ask me, she'd whispered. Cole, please ask me. He dropped to one knee right there on the porch, still holding her hands, his eyes bright with emotion. Lydia Marston, will you marry me? Will you and your children stay here? Make this house our home. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way you deserve to be loved. Yes. The word had come out choked with tears, with joy, with relief. Yes, Cole. Yes to all of it. He'd produced a ring then, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. He'd been carrying it in his pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment, and now he slipped it onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. It's perfect, Lydia had breathed, looking at the ring that caught the lamplight. Cole, it's absolutely perfect. You're perfect. Everything about this is perfect. He'd stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Lydia had let herself lean into him, let herself believe that after all the loss and fear and uncertainty, she'd finally found her safe harbor. They'd told the children the next morning at breakfast. Rosie had cheered and clapped her hands, too young to understand fully, but picking up on the joy in the room. Eli had immediately started planning the celebration, talking about whether they could have a big party and if there would be cake. Daniel had been quiet, his serious eyes moving between his mother and Cole, processing. Daniel? Lydia had asked gently. What do you think, sweetheart? The boy had been quiet for a long moment, and Cole had held his breath knowing that Daniel's approval mattered, that the boy's acceptance was crucial. Finally, Daniel had looked up at Cole with those two old eyes. You'll take care of her, even when things are hard? I will, I promise you that. Cole had met the boy's gaze steadily. I'll take care of all of you, for as long as I live. And you won't leave, even if we make mistakes or cause problems? I'm not going anywhere, Daniel. You're stuck with me. The boy had nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Then, in a voice that was barely audible, he'd asked, Can I call you Papa, like Rosie and Eli do? Cole's throat had closed up completely, his eyes burning. He'd nodded because he couldn't speak, and Daniel had given him a small smile, the first truly unguarded smile Cole had seen from the boy since they'd met. Okay then, I think it's good. Mama deserves to be happy. We all do. The wedding was planned for 3 weeks later, a small ceremony at the church with just close friends and neighbors attending. Mrs. Patterson had taken charge of organizing it with the efficiency of a military general, ensuring that everything was proper and respectable and exactly as it should be. Lydia had spent those 3 weeks in a daze of happiness and preparation. She'd altered her best dress to serve as a wedding gown, pale blue with white lace that she'd traded eggs and butter for at the general store. The children had new clothes too, purchased with money Cole had insisted on providing, and for the first time in years they looked like a prosperous family rather than refugees from disaster. The night before the wedding, as tradition dictated, Cole stayed at a neighbor's house while Lydia and the children remained at the ranch. It felt wrong, being away from them even for one night, and Cole tossed and turned in the unfamiliar bed, counting the hours until he could return home. Home. That's what it was now, fully and completely. Not just his house that happened to contain other people, but a home filled with the people he loved. Tomorrow, it would become official. Tomorrow, they would stand before God and the community and make promises that Cole intended to keep for the rest of his life. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the kind of spring morning that made people believe in new beginnings. Cole dressed carefully in the suit he'd bought for the occasion, the first new suit he'd owned in years, and tried to calm his nerves. He'd done this before, had been engaged before, and that engagement had ended in tragedy. Part of him was terrified that history would repeat itself, that he was tempting fate by reaching for happiness again. But then he arrived at the church and saw Lydia waiting in the vestibule, beautiful in her altered dress with wildflowers in her hair, and all his fears evaporated. She smiled when she saw him, a smile that lit up her entire face, and Cole knew with absolute certainty that this was right. This was meant to be. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor, to cherish and protect, in sickness and health, for better or worse, until death parted them. Cole slipped a second ring onto Lydia's finger, a wedding band to complement the engagement ring, and she did the same for him, her fingers trembling as she pushed the gold band over his knuckle. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Patterson declared, beaming at them. "Mr. Haverford, you may kiss your bride." Cole gathered Lydia into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that was witnessed by the whole congregation but felt as intimate as if they were alone. She kissed him back with equal fervor, and when they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. The children rushed forward, wrapping themselves around both adults in a tangle of arms and legs in joy. Rosie was crying happy tears, Eli was bouncing with excitement, and Daniel was smiling broadly, his reserve finally cracking to reveal the boy underneath. "We're a family now," Eli announced to anyone who would listen. "A real family, official, and everything." The celebration afterward was loud and joyful, the church hall decorated with ribbons and flowers, tables laden with food that neighbors had brought to share. People who'd been skeptical of their arrangement months ago now came forward to offer congratulations and good wishes. Sarah Henderson even managed a stiff smile and a comment about how nice it was that everything had worked out properly in the end. Cole and Lydia danced their first dance as husband and wife to a fiddle tune that was romantic despite its rural simplicity. They moved together with the ease of two people who'd learned each other's rhythms, who'd weathered storms together and come out stronger. "I love you," Cole murmured into her hair. "I love you so much, it terrifies me." "I love you too." "And Cole?" She pulled back slightly to look up at him. "You don't have to be terrified anymore. We're safe now. All of us. We're home." That evening, after the celebration had ended and the children had been tucked into bed exhausted from excitement, Cole and Lydia finally had time alone. They sat on the porch, their porch now, officially, and watched the stars come out one by one. "Mrs. Haverford," Cole said, testing the name. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Haverford?" "It feels right. It feels like everything in my life was leading me here, to this moment, to you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I arrived in Prescott with nothing but 3 children and desperation, and you looked at us and saw a family worth saving. I saw a woman who was brave enough to keep fighting when everything was against her. I saw children who deserved a chance, and I made a snap decision that changed my entire life. Do you regret it, ever? Not once, not even for a second." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You arrived with 3 children, and I told you I had room for 4. But Lydia, I didn't know then what I know now." "What's that?" "That there was room in my heart for so much more than I ever imagined. Room for you and Daniel and Eli and Rosie. Room for the life we're building together. Room for hope and joy and all the things I thought I'd lost forever." He turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "You didn't just fill my empty house. You filled my empty heart." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Cole thought about how far they'd both come. From that train platform where a desperate woman had stood with 3 exhausted children, to this porch where a cowboy who'd thought he was done with living had found his reason to start again. Above them, the Texas sky stretched infinite and star-studded, witnessing their beginning the way it had witnessed countless other beginnings on this wild frontier. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own joys and sorrows. But tonight, Cole Haverford and his new wife sat together in the home they'd made, surrounded by the children they both loved and let themselves believe in forever. They'd both been broken by life, both scarred by loss, but they'd found each other in the wreckage, and together they were building something stronger than either could have created alone. A family. A home. A future worth fighting for. And it had all started because one cowboy had looked at a woman with 3 children and said 5 simple words that changed everything. "I've got room for 4. The first morning of their married life began the way Cole had always dreamed mornings could be, waking with Lydia beside him, sunlight streaming through the window of what was now their shared bedroom, The sounds of children stirring upstairs a reminder that they weren't just husband and wife, but a complete family. He lay there for a moment, watching her sleep, still half convinced this was a dream he'd wake from to find himself alone again. But then her eyes opened, honey gold in the morning light, and she smiled at him with such warmth that his chest ached with the reality of it. "Good morning, husband," she whispered. "Good morning, wife." He pulled her closer, marveling at the simple miracle of being allowed to hold her like this. "How does it feel to wake up as Mrs. Haverford?" "Like coming home after a very long journey." She nestled against him, her hand resting over his heart. "I never thought I'd feel this safe again, Cole. This certain about the future." They would have stayed like that longer, savoring these first quiet moments of their new life together, but the thunder of small feet on the stairs announced that their children had other plans. Rosie burst through the door without knocking, her blonde curls wild around her face, her doll clutched in one hand. "Mama! Papa! It's morning, and I'm hungry, and Eli said there's going to be leftover cake for breakfast, and Daniel said that's not proper, but I think—" She stopped mid-sentence, suddenly realizing she'd interrupted something. "Oh, are you doing married people things?" Lydia laughed, the sound bright and free. "Just talking, sweetheart. And no, there will not be cake for breakfast. There will be eggs and bread like always." "But we're celebrating. Daniel said yesterday was the most important day of our whole lives." "Every day is important now," Cole said, sitting up and holding out his arms. Rosie launched herself at him, with the complete trust of a child who'd learned she was loved beyond measure. "But your brother's right that proper meals are important too. Go tell Eli and Daniel that breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes, and whoever sets the table fastest gets first choice of chores for the day." Rosie scrambled down and raced out, her voice carrying as she shouted the news to her brothers. Cole and Lydia looked at each other and laughed. "So much for a leisurely first morning," Lydia said, but there was no regret in her voice, only joy. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They rose and dressed, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd been sharing space for months. Except now everything felt different. Sanctioned, right. When Cole reached for Lydia's hand as they descended the stairs together, she laced her fingers through his without hesitation, and that simple gesture felt like a victory over all the loneliness that had come before. The kitchen was chaos. The boys arguing over who could set the table faster while Rosie attempted to help and mostly got in the way. Cole started coffee while Lydia began preparing eggs, and together they orchestrated breakfast with the practiced efficiency of two people who'd learned to work as a team. "Papa," Daniel said as they all settled around the table, the formality of his tone suggesting he'd been thinking about this carefully. "Now that you and Mama are married, does that mean this is really our house too? Not just a place we're staying?" Cole set down his coffee cup and looked at the boy, understanding the deeper question beneath the surface one. Daniel had lost one home already, had learned that security could be stripped away in an instant. He needed to know this was permanent. "This is your house," Cole said firmly. "Yours and Eli's and Rosie's and your mother's. It always was, from the moment you arrived, but now it's official. This is our home, all of ours, and nothing is going to change that. Even if something bad happens, even if the ranch has a bad year or someone gets sick or—" "Daniel," Lydia reached across the table to cover her son's hand with hers. "Sweetheart, I know you worry. I know you've learned to expect the worst because the worst has happened to us. But you need to try to trust that we're safe now. Cole isn't going to abandon us. This home isn't going to disappear. You're allowed to stop waiting for everything to fall apart." "Your mother's right," Cole added. "And Daniel, I need you to understand something. When I married your mother yesterday, I didn't just make vows to her. I made them to all of you. I promised to take care of this family, to protect you and provide for you and love you. That's not a promise I make lightly, and it's not one I'll break, ever." Daniel nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his young shoulders. "Okay, I'll try to stop worrying so much." "That's all we ask. Let yourself be a kid again. Let us do the worrying for a while." Cole smiled at him. "Besides, I'm going to need you boys to help me with a project today. A big one." "What kind of project?" Eli asked eagerly, always ready for adventure. "Well, I was thinking it's about time we made some changes around here. This house has been a bachelor's place for too long. We need to make it more of a family home. New curtains in the parlor, maybe some paint on the walls, definitely some furniture for those empty rooms upstairs. Your mother has ideas, and we're going to help her bring them to life. Lydia looked at him with surprise and pleasure. Cole, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This is our home now. It should look like it, feel like it. He gestured around the kitchen, which was already transformed by Lydia's efforts, but could be even better. I want you to make this place yours, Lydia. Change whatever you want, add whatever you need. I've got some money set aside, not a fortune, but enough to make real improvements. This is an investment in our future. Can I paint my room? Eli asked, bouncing in his seat despite his still healing arm. Can I pick the color? I want it to be blue like the sky. We'll discuss colors, Lydia said, but she was smiling. But yes, we can paint your room, all the rooms, if your papa meant what he said. I meant every word. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity and change. True to his word, Cole gave Lydia free rein to transform the house, and she approached the task with the same determined efficiency she brought to everything. They made weekly trips to town for supplies, fabric and paint and lumber for shelves and furniture. The townspeople who'd once gossiped about their arrangement now greeted them as Mr. and Mrs. Haverford, offering congratulations and advice about home improvement projects. Even Sarah Henderson seemed to have made peace with their marriage, stopping Lydia outside the general store one afternoon to compliment her on her new status and offer the name of a good carpenter if they needed one. I may have been hasty in my initial judgment, Sarah admitted with the grudging grace of someone who didn't often apologize. You've proven yourself to be a respectable woman, Mrs. Haverford, and Mr. Haverford is clearly better for having you in his life. I'm woman enough to admit when I was wrong. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, Lydia said, genuine in her gratitude. That means more than you know. The house itself transformed week by week. The parlor gained curtains in a warm cream color that made the room feel larger and brighter. The walls were painted, different colors for different rooms, chosen by family discussion and democratic vote. Daniel got the deep green he'd shyly requested, Eli his sky blue, and Rosie a soft pink that made her squeal with delight. The master bedroom, Cole and Lydia's sanctuary, was painted a warm gold that caught the morning sun perfectly. Furniture began to fill the empty spaces. A proper writing desk for the study where Lydia managed the ranch accounts. Bookshelves for the parlor, slowly filling with volumes purchased or borrowed. A rocking chair for the porch, where Lydia could sit and shell peas or mend clothes while watching the children play. Each addition made the house more of a home, more of a place where a family lived and loved and built memories. But the biggest change came from within the people themselves. The children blossomed in ways that went beyond physical health. Daniel's serious nature softened, allowing room for laughter and mischief. He still took his responsibilities seriously. He was helping Cole with more complex ranch tasks now, learning bookkeeping and cattle management, but he also really played in the way children should. Eli's reckless energy found proper outlets. Once his arm healed and the doctor cleared him for regular activity, Cole began teaching him to ride properly, channeling his adventurous spirit into horsemanship and ranch work. The boy had a natural gift with animals, a gentleness that the horses responded to, and Cole began to see in him the makings of an excellent rancher. And Rosie, who'd been so small and uncertain when they arrived, had grown into a confident, talkative child who ruled the ranch with the benevolent dictatorship only 4-year-olds could manage. She told the chickens stories while collecting eggs, named every cow and horse on the place, and had appointed herself official greeter for anyone who came to visit. But it was Cole himself who underwent the most profound transformation. The solitary cowboy who'd built walls around his heart had become a man who laughed easily, who wrestled with the boys in the evening, who read bedtime stories to Rosie with dramatic voices that made her giggle. The lines of grief that had etched his face began to soften, replaced by lines of joy earned through living rather than merely surviving. Lydia watched this transformation with wonder and deep satisfaction. She'd given him his family back, yes, but he'd given her something equally precious, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. Marcus had been kind, but theirs had been a marriage of convenience and propriety. This, what she had with Cole, was something entirely different. It was passion and friendship and shared purpose, all woven together into something that grew stronger with each passing day. Summer arrived in full force, bringing with it the hard work of a working ranch. There was hay to cut and store, cattle to move to different pastures, endless fence repairs and building maintenance. But now Cole had help. Daniel worked beside him with increasing competence, and even Eli contributed in his enthusiastic way. Lydia managed the household with efficiency that freed Cole to focus on the ranch itself, while also taking on the garden and the chickens and the 100 other small tasks that kept a homestead running. They were a team, all 5 of them, each contributing according to their ability, each valued for what they brought to the family unit. It was on a particularly hot August afternoon, when Cole and the boys were out checking the cattle in the far pasture, that Mark Ellery rode up to the house again. Lydia was in the garden, harvesting tomatoes, Rosie playing nearby with a family of stick dolls she'd constructed. "Mrs. Haverford," Ellery called out, dismounting, "hope I'm not disturbing you." "Mr. Ellery." Lydia straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Not at all. Cole's out with the boys, but they should be back before supper if you'd like to wait." "Actually, I came to see you." He held up a hand at her suddenly wary expression. "Nothing untoward, I promise. I have a business proposition I wanted to discuss with you and your husband." Curious now, Lydia gestured to the porch. "Would you like some cool water? It's brutally hot today." They settled in the shade, Rosie climbing into her mother's lap with the unconscious possessiveness of a loved child. Ellery accepted the water gratefully and then got straight to business. "I'm expanding my operations," he explained, "taking on more cattle, which means I need more hands. I'm also getting older and thinking about the future. I've been impressed with what you and Cole have done here, the efficiency of your operation, the way you've built something solid. And I've been particularly impressed with young Daniel." "Daniel?" Lydia asked, surprised. "He's been helping helping Cole with ranch work, hasn't he? I've seen them in town, seen how that boy handles himself. He's got a good head on his shoulders and a natural feel for the work. In a few years, he's going to be a fine rancher." Ellery leaned forward, his expression serious. "Here's my proposal. I'd like to offer Daniel an apprenticeship of sorts. He could work my ranch a few days a week, learn from my foreman, get experience with a larger operation. I'd pay him fair wages, not full hand wages, he's too young for that, but enough that he'd be earning real money." Lydia felt her throat tighten. "Mr. Ellery, that's incredibly generous, but let me finish. I know what you're thinking, that I'm doing this out of some misguided sense of charity or perhaps lingering feelings. That's not it. I'm a businessman, Mrs. Haverford. I recognize talent when I see it, and your son has it. More than that, I'm thinking about succession. I have no children of my own, no one to leave the Triple E to when I'm gone. In 5-10 years, when Daniel's old enough to take on real responsibility, I'd like to have him positioned to potentially take over my operation. With proper training and compensation, of course." "You're offering my son a future," Lydia said quietly, understanding dawning. "I'm offering him an opportunity. What he makes of it is up to him and up to you and Cole. But yes, if things work out, Daniel could have a ranch of his own one day without having to build it from nothing the way Cole did. He'd earn it through work and learning, but the foundation would be there." Ellery smiled slightly. "I'm not a saint, Mrs. Haverford. This benefits me too. I get a talented young man I can train to run things the way I want them run. But it could be good for Daniel, good for your family. Think about it. Talk to Cole and the boy himself. If you're interested, we can discuss details." After Ellery left, Lydia sat on the porch with Rosie and tried to process what had just happened. The man she'd thought was courting her had instead offered her son a future, an opportunity that went far beyond anything she could have imagined when she'd stumbled off that train platform months ago. When Cole and the boys returned, dusty and tired and laughing about something Eli had said, Lydia told them about Ellery's visit. She watched Cole's face carefully, looking for signs of jealousy or suspicion, but saw only thoughtful consideration. "What do you think?" she asked him later when the children were getting ready for bed, and they had a moment alone. "I think it's a good opportunity. The Triple E is 3 times the size of this place, and Ellery runs it well. Daniel could learn things there I can't teach him." Cole was quiet for a moment, his expression complicated. I'd miss having him around as much, but this isn't about what I want. It's about what's best for the boy. We should ask him, Lydia decided. See what he thinks. They called Daniel down after his brothers were asleep, and Cole explained Ellery's offer carefully, making sure the boy understood both the opportunity and what it would require of him. You'd be working hard, Cole told him honestly. Harder than you work here. Ellery would expect you to earn your wages, not just show up and collect them. But you'd learn from one of the best ranchers in the county, and you'd be building skills that could serve you for life. Daniel listened with his characteristic seriousness, his young face thoughtful. Would I still live here? Would I still be part of this family? Of course, Lydia said immediately. This is your home, Daniel, always. This would just be a job, like Papa has a job managing our ranch. And you'd still be helping me here, Cole added, just not every day. We'd work out a schedule that makes sense for everyone. What do you think I should do? Daniel asked, looking between his mother and Cole. I think you should do what feels right to you, Cole said. But Daniel, I want you to know something. Whether you take this job or not, whether you become a rancher or decide to do something completely different, you're going to be fine. You're smart and hardworking, and you have people who love you. The path you choose is up to you, and we'll support you no matter what. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he looked at Cole with eyes that were older than his years, but also, finally, younger than they'd been in months. I think I'd like to try it, to work for Mr. Ellery and learn more. But Papa? He used the name naturally now, without hesitation. I don't want to leave here. This is my home. You're my family. I just want to make sure I can take care of everyone someday, the way you take care of us. Cole felt his throat close up, felt the weight of this boy's love and trust settling over him like a mantle. You don't have to take care of everyone, Daniel. That's my job. But I understand wanting to build something for yourself, wanting to be prepared for the future. If this is what you want, then we'll make it work. And so Daniel began working at the Triple E 3 days a week, coming home tired but energized, full of stories about what he'd learned. Ellery was a good teacher, demanding but fair, and Daniel flourished under the instruction. The money he earned, real wages that he was fiercely proud of, went into a savings account that Cole helped him open at the bank, the beginning of his own stake in his future. The arrangement benefited everyone. Daniel gained valuable experience and confidence. Ellery got the apprentice he'd wanted. And Cole had more time to focus on his own operation and his family, secure in the knowledge that Daniel was in good hands. As summer faded into fall and the Texas heat finally began to break, life on the Haverford Ranch settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and right. The children started school in town, a one-room schoolhouse where they joined other ranch children for lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Lydia had worried about how they'd be received, whether the scandal of their early situation would follow them. But the other children accepted them easily, and the teacher, Miss Roberts, was kind and encouraging. The ranch itself prospered. Cole's cattle sold well at market, and the money he'd invested in improvements began to pay dividends and increased efficiency and productivity. Lydia's garden produced more than they could eat, and she began selling surplus vegetables in town, earning money that she insisted on putting into their savings. Together, they were building something solid, something that could weather bad seasons and hard times. But the real measure of their success wasn't financial. It was in the way Eli's laughter rang through the house, completely unguarded. It was in the way Daniel came home from Ellery's ranch and excitedly told them everything he'd learned, his natural reserve melting in the face of his enthusiasm. It was in the way Rosie had nightmares less and less frequently, her fears of instability and loss fading as she learned that this home, this family, was permanent. And it was in the way Cole and Lydia moved around each other, partners in every sense of the word, their love deepening with each shared sunrise and quiet evening on the porch. Winter came gently that year, bringing cool nights and occasional rain, but nothing like the harsh freezes that could devastate a ranch. Cole made sure everything was prepared, hay stored, animals sheltered, firewood stacked high. But the preparations felt different now. He wasn't facing winter alone, uncertain if he'd make it through to spring. He was facing it with the family, with people depending on him, and people he could depend on in return. Christmas was a revelation. Lydia insisted they celebrate properly, and she threw herself into preparations with the same determined joy she brought to everything. There was a tree. Cole and the boys cut it from the property and hauled it in, filling the parlor with the scent of pine. There were decorations made from paper and ribbon, strung with popcorn that Rosie helped string with serious concentration. There were cookies baked and gifts secretly made and wrapped. On Christmas morning, they gathered around that tree as the winter sun streamed through the windows, and Cole watched his family open their presents with expressions of pure joy. He'd bought a doll for Rosie that actually had porcelain face, a real treasure that made her eyes go wide with wonder. For Eli, a new pair of boots perfect for ranch work and riding. For Daniel, a knife with his initials engraved on the handle, a tool for a young man who was rapidly becoming a skilled rancher. And for Lydia, Cole had saved his wages carefully to buy a beautiful shawl from the finest fabric the general store carried, soft and warm in deep blue that matched her eyes. "Cole," she breathed when she unwrapped it, tears streaming down her face. "It's too much. It's too beautiful." "You deserve beautiful things," he said simply. "You deserve everything I can give you and more." She kissed him then, right there in front of the children and the Christmas tree, and the children groaned and laughed and teased them, but Cole could see the happiness in their eyes. They liked seeing their parents in love. It made them feel secure in a way nothing else could. Lydia had gifts too, shirts she'd sewn for Cole and the boys, a new blanket for Rosie's bed, a book of poems she'd saved up to buy. But the greatest gift was simpler than any of those things. It was the five of them together in their warm house, safe and healthy and happy, celebrating as a family. "Last Christmas," Lydia said softly that evening, after the children were in bed and she and Cole sat by the fire, "I didn't think we'd survive to see another one. We were in a boarding house in Philadelphia, down to our last few dollars, and I was so scared I couldn't sleep. I didn't know how I was going to feed my children or keep them warm or give them any kind of future." "And now?" Cole asked, pulling her closer against his side. "Now I have everything I never dared hope for. A home, a husband who loves me and loves my children, security and hope, and the promise of all the Christmases to come." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with tears but also with joy. "You gave us that, Cole. You gave us our lives back." "You gave me mine too," he said quietly. "I was surviving, but I wasn't living. Not really. You and the kids, you brought me back to life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance, and Cole thought about the journey that had brought them here. About a woman desperate enough to accept help from a stranger. About a man lonely enough to offer it despite all his vows to stay alone. About how a single moment of compassion had rippled outward to change everything. Spring returned, as it always did, bringing renewal and new growth. The children were thriving. Daniel was being given increasing responsibility at the Triple E and was clearly being groomed as Ellery's eventual successor. Eli was becoming an expert horseman, helping Cole train the younger animals with patience and skill beyond his years. Rosie had started school and was learning to read, proudly sounding out words from the primer Miss Roberts sent home. And then, in early April, Lydia made an announcement that changed everything yet again. She waited until dinner was finished and the children were clearing the table, until she and Cole were alone on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She was nervous, he could tell. Her hands were twisting together the way they did when she had something important to say, but wasn't sure how it would be received. "Cole, I need to tell you something." He turned to her immediately, alerted by her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. Something's very, very right, actually." She took a deep breath, and then the words came out in a rush. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." Cole froze, his mind struggling to process what she'd just said. A baby. Their baby. A child that would be his and hers together, a living symbol of what they'd built. "Cole?" Lydia's voice was uncertain now, worried. "Say something, please." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she gasped. "Are you sure? Are you certain?" "I'm certain. I've been feeling off for weeks, and then I missed my monthly course, and Dr. Morrison confirmed it yesterday when I went to town. I'm about 2 months along, he thinks. The baby will come in late October or early November." Cole felt tears burning in his eyes, felt emotion threatening to overwhelm him completely. He'd thought this was something he'd never have, a child of his own blood, the chance to be a father from the very beginning. He loved Daniel and Eli and Rosie with his whole heart. But this was different. This was the future made flesh. "I'm going to be a father," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "Really, truly a father." "You already are a father," Lydia corrected gently. "You've been a father to my children since the day we arrived. But yes, now you'll be a father to your own child as well. Are you happy? I know we didn't plan this, and things are finally stable. And happy." Cole pulled back enough to look at her, to let her see everything he was feeling written plainly on his face. "Lydia, I'm so happy I can barely breathe. You've given me everything, a home, a family, a reason to live, and now you're giving me this. How could I be anything but grateful?" She sagged with relief, her own tears starting to fall. "I was afraid you might think it was too soon, that we weren't ready. We're ready. We'll figure it out together, the way we figure everything out." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing there. "Our child. Yours and mine." They told the children that night, gathering them in the parlor with serious faces that immediately made the kids worry something was wrong. "Are we moving?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with old fears. "Is something bad happening?" "No, nothing bad," Lydia assured them quickly. "Something wonderful, actually. We wanted to tell you together that, well, you're going to have a new brother or sister. I'm going to have a baby." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then Eli let out a whoop of excitement. "A baby! A real baby! Can I teach it to ride horses?" "Not for several years," Cole said, laughing. "Babies are very small and fragile at first. But yes, eventually you can teach your little brother or sister to ride." "Will it be a boy or a girl?" Rosie asked seriously. "I hope it's a girl. I'm tired of being outnumbered." "We won't know until the baby arrives," Lydia explained. "But either way, the baby will be very lucky to have all of you as older siblings." Daniel had been quiet through this exchange, his expression thoughtful. Now he looked at Cole with something approaching wonder. "You're going to be a real papa, not just ours, but to a baby you made yourself." Cole knelt down in front of the boy, needing him to understand. "Daniel, I want you to hear me clearly. This baby doesn't make me any more of a real papa than I already am. I'm your father in every way that matters. I'm Eli's father. I'm Rosie's father. And yes, I'll be this new baby's father too, but there's no difference in my heart, no difference in my love. You understand me?" Daniel nodded, and Cole saw the relief and love in the boy's eyes. "I understand, and I'll help take care of the baby. I'm the oldest. It's my job to help." "We'll all help," Eli declared. "We're a family. That's what families do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Lydia bloomed with health, her energy remaining high despite the physical demands of carrying a child. She continued managing the household with her usual efficiency, though Cole and the children conspired to make sure she didn't overwork herself. There were morning sickness episodes in the early months, times when she was exhausted beyond measure. But overall, she thrived. The town watched the progression with interest and approval. A baby born to the Haverfords would cement their status as a legitimate family, would silence any remaining whispers about the propriety of their arrangement. Even Sarah Henderson offered congratulations and advice about preparing for a newborn, and Lydia accepted it graciously, grateful for the community's support. As her belly grew and the reality of the coming child became more apparent, Cole found himself simultaneously excited and terrified. He'd helped with plenty of animal births on the ranch, but a human child was entirely different. He read every book about babies and childbirth he could find, pestered Dr. Morrison with questions during their monthly checkups, and drove Lydia to distraction with his hovering concern. "Cole, I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening in August when he'd insisted she sit down after she'd been on her feet for all of 20 minutes. "I've done this 3 times before. I know what I'm doing." "Humor me," he said, arranging cushions behind her back. "You're carrying the most precious cargo in Texas. I'm allowed to be protective." She smiled despite her exasperation, reaching up to touch his face. "I love that you care so much. But sweetheart, you need to relax. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm healthy, the baby's healthy, everything is going exactly as it should. But Cole couldn't quite shake the fear that something would go wrong, that he'd lose her the way he'd lost Margaret, that happiness, this complete, couldn't possibly last. He tried to hide his anxiety, tried not to burden Lydia with his irrational fears, but she knew him too well by now. "Talk to me," she said one night in September, when she'd caught him standing over her while she slept, just watching to make sure she was still breathing. "Tell me what you're so afraid of." So he told her, finally giving voice to the terror that had been building as her due date approached. Told her about Margaret, about the guilt he'd carried, about his certainty that he was somehow cursed to lose everyone he loved. Lydia listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she took his hands and held them firmly. "Cole Haverford, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "I am not Margaret. This is not then. You are not cursed or jinxed or whatever superstitious nonsense you've convinced yourself of. Bad things happen to you. Bad things happen to both of us. But that doesn't mean we're doomed to suffer forever. Sometimes good things happen too. Sometimes people get their happy ending. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you? Then you'll grieve, and you'll survive, and you'll keep going for our children, the way I would have to if something happened to you." Her voice was gentle but firm. "But Cole, living in fear of loss means you're not fully living at all. I refuse to spend these last weeks of my pregnancy worrying about worst-case scenarios. I choose to be excited about meeting our child. I choose to trust that we're going to be fine. And I need you to choose that too." He nodded slowly, trying to absorb her certainty, trying to let it strengthen him. "I'll try. I promise I'll try. That's all I ask." The baby came on a cold November night, 3 weeks before the expected due date, but not so early as to cause alarm. Lydia's water broke during dinner, and suddenly the house erupted into controlled chaos. Cole sent Daniel racing to town to fetch Dr. Morrison, sent Eli and Rosie to the neighbors, despite their protests that they wanted to stay, and then focused all his attention on Lydia. He'd been prepared for this, had read about what to expect, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of watching the woman he loved in pain, working to bring their child into the world. He held her hand through the contractions, wiped sweat from her forehead, and tried to be strong for her even as he felt terrified inside. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, bringing his calm competence and his medical bag. He examined Lydia and declared that everything was progressing normally, that the baby would be here before midnight. The next hours were the longest of Cole's life. He stayed with Lydia the entire time, refusing to leave even when Dr. Morrison suggested he might be more comfortable waiting downstairs. He'd brought her into this situation. He'd be damned if he wasn't there to see her through it. "You're doing so well," he murmured during a brief respite between contractions. "So strong. I'm so proud of you." "Tell me that when this is over," Lydia gasped, her face pale and strained. "Right now I'm mostly just trying not to curse you for getting me into this situation." He would have laughed, but then another contraction hit, and she was gripping his hand hard enough to break bones, and all he could do was hold on and let her use him as an anchor. At 11:43 on a cold November night, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that announced her displeasure at being evicted from her warm, comfortable home. Dr. Morrison cleaned her, checked her, and then placed her in Lydia's arms with a satisfied smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Haverford. You have a healthy baby girl." Cole stared at the tiny creature his wife held, at the red, squalling bundle that was his daughter, and felt something inside him crack open completely. She was perfect, impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and a face scrunched in protest, but absolutely perfect. "Do you want to hold her?" Lydia asked, her voice exhausted but radiant with joy. With trembling hands, Cole took his daughter, cradling her against his chest with the careful reverence of someone holding the most precious thing in the world. She quieted at his touch, her tiny face relaxing, and Cole felt tears streaming down his face without shame. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your papa. I've been waiting to meet you." She opened her eyes, impossibly blue, like all newborns, and seemed to look right at him, and Cole fell completely, irrevocably in love for the second time in his life. "What should we name her?" Lydia asked softly. They'd discussed names during the pregnancy but had never settled on anything definitive. Now, looking at his daughter's perfect face, Cole knew exactly what her name should be. Hope, he said quietly. Her name is Hope, because that's what she represents. That's what you all gave me when I thought I'd lost it forever. Hope Haverford? Lydia tested the name, smiling. It's perfect. She's perfect. We're perfect. They brought Hope home to a house that was ready for her. The children had helped Cole prepare a nursery in one of the upstairs rooms, painting it soft yellow and filling it with blankets and clothes that Lydia and the church ladies had sewn. The other children were smitten with their baby sister, each wanting to hold her and help care for her in whatever way they could. Daniel was especially attentive, approaching the baby with the same serious care he brought to everything, learning how to support her head properly and burp her after feedings. Eli was more exuberant in his affection, but no less devoted, declaring himself Hope's official protector against all threats. And Rosie, thrilled to finally have a sister, appointed herself assistant to everything, shadowing her mother and trying to help with every diaper change and bath. Winter that year was harsh, bringing freezing temperatures and snow that was rare for their part of Texas. But inside the Haverford house, there was nothing but warmth. Cole would come in from checking the stock, half frozen from the wind, and find his family gathered around the fire, Lydia nursing Hope while the other children did homework or played quiet games. The sight never failed to move him, this picture of domestic contentment that he'd once thought impossible. On Christmas Eve, as they all gathered around the tree with baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Cole looked around at the family he'd built and felt a contentment so complete it almost frightened him with its intensity. "Papa," Rosie said, climbing into his lap despite being nearly 5 and thinking herself too old for such childish comfort, "tell us the story again about how we came to live here." It had become a family tradition, this story, told and retold until it had taken on the quality of legend. Cole settled Rosie more comfortably and began the familiar tale. It was a hot day in April, and I was in town for supplies. I was planning to get what I needed and head straight back to the ranch, the way I always did. But then the train arrived, and I saw your mama standing on the platform with 3 tired children and nowhere to go. "And you said you had room for 4, Eli chimed in, knowing his part. "That's right. I told your mama I had room for 4. I didn't know then that what I really had was room in my heart for a whole family." Cole pulled Lydia closer with his free arm, including her in the embrace. "Your mama brought you 3 here, thinking it was temporary, thinking it was just a place to rest until she figured out what to do next. But it wasn't temporary," Daniel added quietly. "It was home." "It was home," Cole agreed. "It is home, for all of us. We built this together, turned a lonely ranch into a place filled with love and laughter and life. And now we have Hope, too, the newest member of our family. Proof that good things can grow from desperate beginnings." "Tell us what you're grateful for," Lydia prompted, another part of the family tradition. "Let's all say it." They went around the circle, each person sharing what they were thankful for. The children spoke of horses and school and their baby sister, of having enough to eat and warm beds to sleep in, of feeling safe and loved. When it was Cole's turn, he looked at each face in turn, Daniel with his old soul eyes, Eli with his infectious enthusiasm, Rosie with her complete trust, Lydia with her steady strength, and baby Hope sleeping peacefully through the chaos of her family. "I'm grateful for a train that arrived on a hot day in April," he said quietly, "for a woman brave enough to accept help from a stranger, for 3 children who taught me how to be a father, and for a baby girl who reminds me every day that life is about moving forward, not staying stuck in the past." His voice thickened with emotion. "I'm grateful for every single one of you, for the family we've become, for the home we've built, for the future we're going to share." "We're grateful for you too, Papa," Daniel said, and the other children echoed the sentiment, a chorus of love that filled every corner of the house. Later that night, after the children were finally in bed and Hope had been fed and settled in her cradle, Cole and Lydia stood together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms, looking out at the frozen landscape. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Lydia asked softly. "About how different things could have been if you'd just pointed me toward a boarding house and walked away?" "Sometimes. Usually when I wake up next to you and can't quite believe this is real." He pulled her closer. "You asked me once why I stopped, why I didn't just mind my own business and go back to being alone. I remember. You said you saw us and couldn't walk away. That's part of it, But I think the real reason is that some part of me, some part I'd buried deep down, recognized you. Recognized that you and those three children represented everything I'd given up hope of ever having. And that part of me was brave enough to reach out one more time, to risk one more time, despite all my fears. I'm glad it was brave. I'm glad you reached out, because Cole, I don't think I would have made it without you. We wouldn't have made it. You're stronger than you think. You would have found a way. Maybe, but it wouldn't have been this way. It wouldn't have been this perfect. She turned in his arms to face him. Do you remember what you said to me the night before our wedding? When I asked if you ever regretted bringing us here? I said I didn't regret it. Not once, not for a second. Do you still feel that way? Now that you have a house full of children and all the chaos and responsibility that comes with a family? Now that your quiet bachelor life is gone forever? Cole looked through the window behind them into the warm glow of their home. He could see the Christmas tree still lit, could see the cradle where hope slept, could see the evidence of his family in every corner of every room. The Texas sky stretched infinite and star-studded above them, bearing witness to this moment the way it had witnessed their beginning. Cole thought about journeys and destinations, about how the bravest thing he'd ever done was say 5 simple words to a desperate woman on a train platform. I wouldn't trade a single moment, Cole said finally, his voice firm with certainty. Not the chaos or the fear or the responsibility, not even the sleepless nights with a crying baby or the worry that comes with loving people this much. This life, this family, it's everything I thought I'd lost the right to have. And Lydia, every single day I wake up grateful that you arrived with 3 children and I had room for 4. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Cole tasted salt on her lips. Her tears or his, he wasn't sure. Maybe both. Room for 4, she whispered against his mouth, and then room for 1 more. You built a life big enough for all of us, Cole Haverford. Big enough for love and hope and all the messy, beautiful chaos that comes with being a family. We built it, he corrected. Together. That's how it works now. We build everything together. They stood there on the porch of their home, wrapped in each other's arms against the winter cold, and watched the stars wheel overhead. Inside, their children slept safe and warm, dreams undisturbed by fears of abandonment or loss. The ranch stretched around them, productive and prosperous, a testament to hard work and partnership. And in the nursery upstairs, baby Hope, their living symbol of second chances, breathed steadily in the darkness. The cowboy who'd thought he was done with living had found his reason to thrive. The widow who'd thought she was out of options had discovered new possibilities. And 3 children who'd lost their father had found something equally precious, a man who chose them, who stood by them, who proved that family wasn't just about blood, but about commitment and love and showing up every single day. Cole Haverford had said he had room for 4, but what he'd really had was room in his heart for as much love as life wanted to give him. And life, generous and surprising, had given him everything. As the first light of Christmas morning began to paint the eastern sky, Cole and Lydia finally went inside, closing the door on the cold night and stepping into the warmth of the home they'd made. Behind them, the Texas frontier stretched vast and unforgiving, a land that broke as many dreams as it fulfilled. But inside these walls, there was only light and love, and the sound of their daughter stirring in her cradle, ready to greet her first Christmas morning surrounded by a family that would never let her feel alone or unloved or uncertain about her place in the world. This was the happy ending neither Cole nor Lydia had thought possible when they'd met on that train platform months ago. But it was also a beginning, the beginning of all the years they'd spent together, building memories and raising children and growing old side by side. The journey that had started with 5 simple words, "I've got room for 4, had led them here, to this perfect Christmas morning, to this family that shouldn't have worked but did, to this love that had healed them both. And really, that was the only ending that mattered. Not the dramatic moments or the grand gestures, but this, the quiet contentment of a family together, safe and whole and home, forever home.